He vanished without a trace. But his dog never stopped looking. The snow had long melted. The search teams had gone. And the radios had gone quiet. In the forest stillness, only one figure remained. A German shepherd curled beside an old pine, waiting. They said Liam Turner was gone, swallowed by the storm, lost during that final call for help. They held the funeral, folded the flag, whispered about the odds. But not everyone believed the story ended there. Because Tanner, his canine partner, didn't mourn the way others did. He searched, not with grief but with purpose. Every day, he returned to the forest. Same trail, same trees, same whistle in the wind. No one could explain it. No GPS, no scent. Just a dog, and a memory too strong to forget. And then, one autumn morning, 6 years later, something happened that changed everything. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about loyalty that never gives up. And the silent ways a dog can rewrite fate. 2 years earlier, the pines stood like sentinels under a soft veil of fog, their breath rising in silence as dusk folded gently over the forest behind the old cabin. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out once, then went still. Liam's laughter broke the hush-a-high, bright sound that cut through the chill. He was 10, barefoot on damp pine needles, chasing after a blur of black and tan fur weaving between the trees. Tanner, only a few months old then, was still clumsy in his legs, always sliding too far when he turned and knocking into tree roots with that ridiculous puppy joy. "Come on, Tanner," Liam called, his cheeks flushed from the cold and the running. He blew into the silver whistle his father had left behind, an old keepsake from some military past. Liam only knew through stories. Tanner whipped around at the sound and bounded toward him, ears perked, tail high, tongue lolling like he didn't have a care in the world. Clara watched from the porch, arms folded, a mug of tea cooling between her palms. The boy and the dog, the only things that had kept her standing after David died. There were days she couldn't find her breath, couldn't stand to look at David's flannel shirt still hanging in the back of the closet, or his boots lined up by the door as if he might still come home. But Liam's giggle, Tanner's bark, they were reasons to get out of bed. But that evening, something shifted. It began with the sound, a low rumble at first, mechanical, unfamiliar, wrong. Liam paused mid-chase. "You hear that?" he whispered, though there was no one around to answer. The engine whined, then faded. Tanner's ears stiffened. He turned toward the road beyond the trees, his nose twitching at something the boy couldn't sense. And then he was off. "Tanner?" Liam called, stepping forward. "Hey, come back." But the woods swallowed his voice. Liam ran, heart thudding, the whistle bouncing against his chest. The fog was thicker now, pulling low over the roots, twisting between trunks like it wanted to hide things. He called and called. No bark answered back. Minutes passed. Then more. When Clara found him nearly an hour later, he was curled beside the creek that ran behind the property, his arms wrapped around nothing, his eyes wide and empty. He didn't speak. Only when she knelt beside him did she see the whistle, broken clean in half, clenched in his small fist like something that could still bring Tanner back. "He didn't come when I called," Liam whispered. "He always comes." Clara wrapped him in her coat, even though he resisted. His tears had frozen in the corners of his eyes. They searched for days after Father, the sheriff, a few neighbors. Posters went up, paw prints were found near the fence line, a single tuft of fur caught in the wire. And then, nothing. Liam stopped sleeping through the night. He'd stand at the back porch with the other half of the whistle and blow, soft and hopeful, until Clara gently led him back inside. "Tanner's smart," she'd say. "He'll find his way home. Dogs always do. But her voice cracked each time, and Liam could hear the doubt she tried to hide. The morning sun filtered through a haze of dust and pollen, brushing the pine-stained windows of the modest cabin where Liam sat half-shadowed, half-lost. He was 12 now, though his eyes aged faster than his years. They rarely blinked, as if afraid to miss something dangerous hiding just beyond the edges of stillness. He watched from the edge of the porch, knees drawn tight to his chest, arms wrapped like armor around them. The pine fence, a few feet away, didn't block much, but it was where he felt safest. Behind it, hidden, quiet. Beyond the fence, the world moved in fragments, birds picking at needles, A rusted truck coughing into life at the neighbors. The wind nudging an old swing into creaky rhythm. But to Liam, it was all background static. He wasn't waiting for sounds. He was waiting for Tanner. 2 years. The thought scraped like bark against memory. Clara stepped out of the house behind him, quietly adjusting the collar of her charcoal coat. Her face was pale, drawn tight at the cheekbones, like someone who had long ago made peace with exhaustion but still hadn't forgiven it. The courtroom was calling. Again. She glanced at her son but didn't call his name. She'd learned that silence reached him better than noise. Instead, she stood beside him and said, "You don't have to come today, but if you change your mind." I packed the whistle. Liam didn't look at her. His fingers brushed something in his coat pocket, something cold and silver, jagged at one end. The broken whistle. The one Tanner wore that night. Clara knelt slowly, letting the weight of her body meet the earth. "Liam," she said gently, "if you see him, if somehow you'll let me know, won't you?" He nodded once. Barely. That was all she needed. She rose, kissed the crown of his head without touching skin, and walked to the battered sedan parked under the pine's shadow. When she drove off, Liam remained still, eyes following the trail of dust left behind. Then they turned again to the woods. The pines were breathing that morning. At the edge of Ashridge County, behind a cinderblock complex hidden between a bakery and a half-forgotten armory, the gates of the K9 unit compound groaned open. Inside, the soundscape shifted. Boots thudded against gravel. Radios crackled. Doors hissed open and slammed shut. And somewhere in the controlled chaos, a German shepherd with eyes like smoldered amber padded forward, silent and certain. Argo. His coat was a quilt of sun-baked bronze and midnight black, each muscle under his skin mapped and memorized through years of conditioning. But it was his stillness that unsettled most handlers. Still as stone until called. Still as a ghost watching a world that didn't quite trust its own silence. Sergeant Malik brushed a gloved hand over Argo's head. "Easy, boy. They say the courtroom's high profile. You'll be near the witness box." Argo didn't respond. Not with a wag. Not with a sound. He merely blinked Onceslow and Deliberatias, if recording it all. Behind those eyes wasn't just obedience. It was memory. "Let's get the inspection done," Malik said. They moved into the examination bay. Vets checked joints, eyes, breath response. Argo endured it like ritual. But when they unwrapped the scent training cloth just for confirmation, Argo's body coiled. Still restrained, but coiled. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. Malik frowned. He keyed on that too fast. A younger officer, Reeves, raised an eyebrow. "That's the cloth we used last spring in the Anderson case, right?" Malik nodded. From the warehouse perimeter, still unlinked to any suspect. Argo's nostrils flared, but he didn't lunge. He just stared. At something only he could smell. "Reset his focus," Malik ordered. But it didn't come easily. Argo remained tense. As they guided him back to the holding bay, Malik made a note on the clipboard. Argo displayed heightened sensory fixation. Investigate overlap with pending trial evidence. Clara stood beneath the courthouse steps, chin lifted against the breeze. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but fatigue. The trial had dragged on for months. Atlas Development's encroachment on protected land had torn through the pines like rot in an old tree, and the whistleblower Clara's late husband was gone, buried, dismissed as unstable. Only she remained. And Liam. Today, a new witness was expected to testify. A forestry official, anonymous until now. Clara's attorney warned her the defense would fight dirty. A black Fen pulled up. She turned just as the K9 unit arrived. Malik stepped out first. Then Argo led with quiet reverence through the marble archway. The moment Clara saw the dog, something in her lungs hitched. The gait, the fur, even from a distance, it resembled number. That was impossible. But for a brief second, Argo looked up at the courthouse, ears twitching. And across the wind-drawn square, a boy behind a pine fence sat up straighter. His fingers clutched something in his pocket. Something silver. Something broken. His breath caught. And for the first time in 2 years, Liam whispered a word into the air, like casting a line into a memory. Tanner? The examination room inside the Rivergate K9 precinct was lit with fluorescent sterility clean, bright and cold. The kind of cold that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the silence between people too tired to speak and dogs too trained to bark. Officer Grant Maddox leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his vest, eyes narrowing at the German Shepherd sitting obediently in the center of the tiled floor. "Argo." "Again," Maddox said, nodding at the technician. A buzzer rang. The clatter of metal echoed as a padded barrier dropped in front of the dog. Argo didn't flinch. His ears perked, body tight, every muscle in him coiled like a spring. Then, the targeted decoy in thick sleeves moved from behind the wall. "Engage." But Argo hesitated. It wasn't long, maybe 2-3 seconds. But in the business of K9 law enforcement, 2 seconds could be a life. The handler, Officer Reyes, frowned and gave the command again. This time, Argo lunged with precision, clamping on the decoy's arm with just enough pressure to immobilize without harm. Controlled. Mechanical. Still, not immediate. "That's the 3rd time this week," Reyes muttered, kneeling to adjust the harness after the test ended. "He's solid in everything else, but it's like sometimes he's thinking too long." Grant didn't reply. He stepped closer, crouching to Argo's level. The dog looked up, amber eyes, alert but tired. Not weak, just heavy, as if carrying something no leash could pull back from. Grant reached for the thick leather collar, brushing past the metal loop and the tracking tag, his fingers pausing over a worn edge near the buckle. A faint shimmer of something old, something that didn't belong. He rubbed with his thumb. The letters surfaced slowly beneath grime and time. T-A-N. He squinted. "You see this?" he asked Reyes. Reyes peered over. "Some old engraving. Could have been from the military rotation. Lots of these dogs get transferred in from other units. Protocol says they should have stripped any old tags," Grant replied, more to himself. He didn't finish the thought. Didn't need to. He'd worked long enough to know when silence held more truth than a report ever could. "Run a tag check anyway," he said, "just in case." But the system only listed him as Argo, registered unit 517K9, transferred from a decommissioned federal facility whose records were mostly redacted. No back history, no former handlers. Just a date of entry and a string of training logs. Precise, sanitized, soulless. Outside the glass, rain had begun to fall thin at first, then a steady beat against the pane. Argo stood near the corner of the room, not pacing, just still, too still. Later that evening, as most of the precinct prepared for the courtroom assignment the next day, Grant stayed behind in the kennel wing. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one holding a dog bred and trained for war on the streets. But Argo's was different. He lay in the back of the enclosure, not sleeping, not watching, just listening. Grant knew the difference. Dogs who listened were remembering something, or someone. He crouched again, this time outside the bars. "You got ghosts, huh?" he murmured. No response, just the flick of an ear. Wear and tear, Reyes had said earlier, but Grant had seen wear and tear. Torn ligaments, missing teeth, dull eyes. This wasn't that. This was grief. A dog's grief was different than a man's. It didn't scream, didn't collapse in bars. It waited for someone who never came back, waited until the waiting became part of who it was. Argo shifted slightly. The moonlight from the high window caught the curve of his face. Grant saw the faint outline of the letters again. T-A-N. Could have been Tanner. Could have been nothing. Could have been everything. He stood, locking eyes with the dog one last time before stepping out. Behind him, Argo remained motionless, but deep in his chest, something stirred. A name not called in years. A scent barely remembered, pine trees, and boy sweat and metal whistles. A voice high-pitched with youth. A laugh that ended in a scream. He had buried it all. But names? Names had a way of digging their way back through the silence. The marble steps leading into the Rivergate courthouse glistened under the sheen of an early rain. The building loomed, gray and impenetrable, its iron columns catching morning light like sentinels carved from judgment itself. Clara adjusted the collar of her coat and held her breath. For a moment, her hand lingered on the rusted whistle tucked inside her Paquita relic, a reminder. Beside her, Liam walked quietly, his shoulders hunched inside his wool sweater, Fingers curled white around the strap of his backpack. A sea of cameras clicked like locusts as they approached the courthouse doors. "Clara Bellamy, do you really think you can win against Atlas? What evidence do you have, ma'am? Isn't it true your husband worked with the logging board before he died?" The reporter's questions felt like thorns dragging along her skin. Clara kept her eyes forward. She didn't owe them explanations. Only the truth in that would come, if the system let it. They passed through security, where uniformed deputies stood watch, faces blank beneath their visors. That's when Liam saw him. A German shepherd stood near the judge's bench tall, disciplined, still as stone, a K9. His coat was the color of smoke and sand, and his eyes weren't ordinary. They tracked everything without judgment, only the quiet calculation of a creature that knew more than it let on. The badge, stitched on his harness, read, "Argo, Unit 14B. Liam froze. His heart thudded strangely in his chest. He didn't say anything, not to his mom, not to the guard who waved them through, but the boy's gaze stayed fixed on the dog, long after they were seated. The courtroom itself was no comfort. Polished wood, artificial light, and the towering seal of justice behind the judge's chair made everything feel colder. Atlas Corporation's legal team had already claimed their territory. 3 rows of sleek suits, leather briefcases, digital tablets, men and women who smiled without warmth and greeted the judge by first name. Clara sat alone at her end of the table, a single yellow folder clutched in her hands. Inside it, photographs, emails, maps, and a deed. The deed her husband had fought to keep secret before his death. Liam sat behind her. His feet didn't touch the ground, and his eyes never stopped flickering toward the K9 near the bench. Every few minutes, the dog would scan the room, nose slightly raised, ears rotating to catch subtle sounds. But then, just for a breath of a second, his gaze would settle on Liam and linger. Not in aggression, not curiosity, but something keener. Recognition, perhaps. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, an older man with steel-gray hair and a voice like cracked bark, took his seat with a sigh. "Let's begin. Case number 117B. Bellamy versus Atlas Development." From across the aisle, the Atlas lead counsel stood tall and overconfident. "Your Honor, I would like to file a motion to dismiss. Miss Bellamy is not a legal professional. Her claims are emotional, not factual. There is no precedent for—" "I've read your motion," the judge interrupted. "I've denied it. Miss Bellamy has a legal right to represent herself, and I'm here to hear both sides. Proceed." A small breath of air escaped Clara's chest. Her knuckles relaxed from the folder. As Atlas began laying out their case slides, charts, economic projections, Liam tuned it all out. The courtroom became a blur of adult voices and polished rhetoric. His ears filled with a ringing hum. He felt the weight of the past pressing into his spine. Tanner's face, Tanner's bark. The last sound in the fog before silence fell. He looked up again. The K9 had moved, not far, just a few feet, but now he was angled toward Liam, and this time, when their eyes met, the shepherd gave the faintest twitch of his left ear, a signal. Liam remembered. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. And yet, the name Tanner had been a whisper in their house for 2 years. Clara no longer spoke it. Liam only did in dreams. But now, staring into the calm, unreadable eyes of a police dog in court, something old and raw clawed its way to the surface. A name buried under silence. Clara stood at the front of the courtroom, voice steady despite the quiver in her throat. "My husband, Dean Bellamy, died trying to expose what Atlas had planned for Pinefield Reserve. He left behind more than memories. He left proof." A ripple stirred across the courtroom. One of the Atlas attorneys leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "This is not just a forest. This is not just about trees. It's about a promise about legacy. They're burying something up there, under cement and paper trails. My son and I, we lived it." The judge nodded solemnly. "You'll have time to present that, Miss Bellamy. For now, let's adjourn for lunch. Reconvene at 1:30. As the gavel struck, a dozen conversations erupted around the room, but Liam stayed seated, rooted to the bench. The K9 handler approached the dog, clipping on the lead. "Good boy, Argo," he murmured. Still sharp as ever. Liam rose slowly, approached the aisle, and paused just within arm's length of the dog. The German Shepherd turned, and then the smallest thing happened. So small the handler didn't notice. The dog's tail moved. Once. Not stiff, not mechanical, but familiar. Like a memory wagging itself awake. Liam whispered, barely audible, "Tanner?" The dog didn't move, didn't bark, but he blinked slow, deliberate. Clara turned to call her son, but when she saw him frozen beside the K9, something in her face changed. Grief, meeting recognition. The storm had not passed. It had just begun. The courtroom had the stale chill of an overused air conditioner and the sharp edge of unspoken tension. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. Lawyers shuffled papers and adjusted ties. The judge hadn't entered yet, but Clara felt the weight of Atlas Development's legal team as if they were boulders pressed against her lungs. Liam sat beside her, shoulders hunched, sleeves too short for his arms that had outgrown childhood without anyone really noticing. His fingers picked at a loose thread on his cuff. His silence wasn't new, but today it throbbed with a different kind of nervous energy. The bailiff called the room to order. Then the doors opened, and the K9 entered. Not a sound followed him. Just the steady click of his nails on polished wood. He moved like he belonged in a war zone, not a courthouse. Black and tan fur groomed to perfection, eyes sharp, movements precise. The officer guiding him wore a stoic mask, but the dog was the one people watched. His name tag read K9 Argo. Liam turned slightly, breath catching, pupils tightening. Not because he feared the dog, no. It was something else. Something like a memory trying to take shape before it vanished. Argo stopped near the judge's bench, stood at attention. But a moment later, almost imperceptibly, his ears flicked, his body tensed. He tilted his head just a fraction to the left, toward the gallery. And then he moved. A single paw forward, a sniff, then another. The officer gave a soft tug at the leash, a redirecting cue. But Argo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lowered his nose toward the floor near the jury box and inhaled deeply, posture straightening, tail no longer still. A low, steady growl rumbled from his chest. The courtroom paused. "Easy, Argo," the handler said under his breath, tugging gently. Argo relented, but not before his gaze swept across the room and settled on one face. Liam. Two amber eyes met two gray ones across the divide. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Clara was still flipping through her notes, her pen shaking slightly as she underlined a sentence she'd read 10 times. The lawyers whispered about zoning permits and precedent. But Liam stared. And the dog stared back. There was something in that look, not recognition exactly, but the echo of it, like a photograph left in the sun, faded but familiar. Argo's ears relaxed a little. His tail lowered. His weight shifted slightly forward, not in defense, in curiosity. Liam blinked. His fingers froze mid-fidget. Slowly, almost involuntarily, his hand rose toward the silver chain around his neck. From beneath his shirt, he pulled out the small, dented whistle. Clara noticed it too late. Argo did not move, but his nose flared. The whistle never made a sound. Yet, somehow, Argo lifted his chin, nostrils twitching. A tremor ran through him, quick and subtle, like wind through tall grass. The handler noticed and knelt down, checking Argo's posture, tapping a command pad at his belt. "Strange," he muttered. "Heart rate spike. Could be the kid," another deputy whispered from the back. "Some dogs react weird distress signals, hormonal stuff." But the explanation didn't land, because Argo wasn't afraid. He wasn't hostile. He was waiting. Waiting for something that didn't come. Then the door opened behind them. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Whitley." The spell broke. Clara stood, shoulders squared. The judge entered. Argo returned to attention, posture perfect again. Whatever had passed between him and Liam folded itself into the silence like an invisible thread pulled taut. The trial began. Atlas's lawyers were first confident, rehearsed. They spoke of progress, of revitalizing the county's economy, of unused land, and misunderstood intentions. Their presentation was slick. Graphs projected onto the screen with smooth transitions, photographs edited just enough to erase the damage. Clara listened, jaw clenched, fingers gripping her pen like a lifeline. Liam didn't look at them. His eyes drifted, again and again, back to the dog. And Argo, though trained to remain motionless, flicked his ears each time the boy shifted. Near the witness box, the janitor dropped a pen. Argo flinched. Not much, but just enough. His eyes darted. His body turned a fraction. The handler tapped his knee. A silent reprimand. Argo settled again, but the tension was growing. From the gallery, a woman in a green scarf coughed sharply in odd rhythm. Argo's ears perked again. He sniffed, low and short, then pressed his body closer to the bench. His gaze swept the courtroom a second time. Not fast, but purposeful. Something was wrong. The handler adjusted the harness slightly, whispering another command. Argo complied, but his tail remained stiff, focused, engaged. Clara finished scribbling a note and reached for Liam's hand beneath the table. He didn't respond right away. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. He nodded, eyes still locked on the dog. Quiet, but not disconnected. More like a radio tuning into a frequency no one else could hear. Then, out of nowhere, a gust of wind rattled the high windows. A storm was building outside, silent thunder, pressing against glass. The judge's voice barely faltered as he continued speaking, but the room grew a fraction colder. And Argo suddenly, softly let out one long exhale, as if he remembered something, or someone. The handler looked down at him again, frowning. "You're off today," he murmured. But Liam wasn't so sure it was Argo who was off. Something had just shifted, not outside, inside. The courtroom moved like a slow river of procedure paper shuffling, attorneys rising and sitting, the judge's voice steady and measured. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, washing everything in a sterile glow. Clara sat upright, jaw set, her hands folded in her lap as she listened to the attorney from Atlas drone on about economic imperative and land optimization. But beside her, Liam wasn't hearing any of it. His eyes weren't on the polished oak walls or the glossy exhibits on deforestation statistics. They were on the dog. Stationed by the judge's bench, the German shepherd stood like a statue of control ears, perked, shoulders squared, nose gently twitching at the courtroom's tapestry of scent. His handler sat nearby, pretending not to notice that the dog hadn't taken his eyes off Liam since the recess ended. It wasn't the casual alertness of a working K9. It was something else, something more focused, intentional. A tether drawn taut between two souls, unsure who tied it first. Liam shifted in his chair, heart clattering against his ribs. He didn't speak, not at first. He just stared. The dog's gaze didn't waver, not once. Then Liam leaned slightly forward, the courtroom buzzing around him like static. His lips parted, and from somewhere behind all the silence he'd learned to wear like armor, he whispered, barely more than breath. "Tanner." The dog flinched. It was so small, so contained. It would have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't watching as closely as Liam was. But it was there, slight recoil in the shoulders, a soft backward step of the paw. And then the ears lowered, just a fraction, the way Tanner's used to when he got caught sneaking onto Liam's bed after muddy play. The boy's throat tightened. He hadn't said that name in 2 years, hadn't allowed it to pass his lips, as if saying it would erase what little memory remained. But now, it hung in the air between them like a thread, trembling in the wind, thin and invisible, but unbreakable. The shepherd blinked, eyes deep and uncertain. His stance wavered just barely before his training corrected it. He steadied himself again, head turning slightly away, as if to retreat behind the safety of code and command. But his gaze flicked back to Liam when he thought no one was looking. Clara noticed the shift in her son's posture. His fingers had gone rigid around the hem of his sweatshirt, knuckles white. She turned to follow his line of sight and caught the tail end of the dog's gaze. Something in her heart stumbled. The judge called for a short recess. Chairs scraped, conversations restarted, and bodies stirred, but Liam remained still. His eyes never left the shepherd. The handler gave the dog a tap, and they stepped out briefly into the side hall. But before they disappeared, the shepherd hesitated at the threshold. He glanced back. Not at the judge. Not at the door. At the boy. Liam rose from his seat without thinking. "Liam?" Clara called softly, alarm threading her voice. But he walked forward anyway, Not fast, not with certainty, but with something raw and unspoken urging his feet. The bailiff intercepted him gently, hand to shoulder. "You okay, buddy?" Liam didn't answer. His eyes were still fixed on the exit where the dog had gone. He stood there, rooted, as if he could will time to fold and carry him back 2 years ago, that foggy evening in the pines when he'd lost more than a dog. He'd lost a piece of himself. The handler returned minutes later, the dog at his side. This time, the shepherd's eyes darted quickly to Liam, and then down, a flicker of recognition there, but caged, controlled, muffled under training and orders, and the life of something that had been renamed. But Clara saw it. She wasn't sure how, but she saw it. Maybe it was in the way the dog's shoulders slightly dropped, or the way his nose gave the air a second, deeper intake. Or maybe it was the look on her son's faceno, longer vacant, but filled with a quiet ache she hadn't seen in a long time. When they returned to their seats, Liam didn't look away. He sat still, quiet, but alert, as if something inside him had cracked open just enough to let hope back in. A few minutes later, as testimony resumed, the shepherd lay down on command, but his body angled just slightly, not toward the judge or the handler, but toward the boy. His chin rested on his paws, and his eyes, those dark, tired, knowing eyes, watched Liam. Clara, trying to follow the next witness's words, couldn't help but glance at her son again. She saw the way his breathing had slowed, the way his shoulders had eased just a little, not relaxed, but less burdened, as if some invisible weight had lifted off his chest. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just coincidence, a child's wishful heart seeking shapes in clouds. But as the judge spoke, and gavels fell, and lawyers leaned in with whispers, a fragile stillness settled between the boy and the doga, moment tucked beneath the noise. A moment no one else seemed to notice, except them. And in that moment, neither one blinked, neither one moved. And in the place where memories sleep but never die, a name waited, not just engraved beneath a worn collar, but beneath bone and breath and loyalty, unbroken by time. Tanner. Courtrooms are supposed to hold stillness like a pressed flower between the pages of justice, stiff, ordered, silent unless summoned. But on this morning, as dust curled in sunbeams slicing through the courthouse windows, that stillness fractured. Clara had just finished passing a note to her attorney, a quiet correction about a date misstated by the Atlas Development representative, when the sharp sound of claws against tile snapped the room's focus. Argo. The K-9 had been stationed dutifully beside the judge's bench for most of the trial, eyes forward, posture disciplined. He had barely moved, save for the slow rotation of his ears and the occasional flick of his tail, until now. With no signal, no command, he lunged. A gasp swept across the courtroom like wind across dry leaves. Argo's handler, Officer Rayburn, stumbled in pursuit as the dog shot across the courtroom floor, a blur of tan muscle and coiled tension. His claws skidded once at the foot of the jury box, then dug in, and then he stopped. No bark, no attack. Instead, Argo pressed both front paws against the wooden paneling beneath juror seat number 4 and began to dig. Wildly. The jury flinched backward in their seats, startled. One woman clutched her chest. A man in a gray blazer stood as if to flee. "Control your dog," barked the judge, hammering his gavel. Officer Rayburn reached the dog and latched onto the harness, pulling back. "Argo heel, Argo off." His voice cracked from shock more than command. But the dog wouldn't yield. A low, guttural growl spilled from Argo's chest, not the fearsome snarl of a predator, but the sound of warning. His tail held stiff as a flag at half-mast. He sniffed again, pawing insistently at the floor as if something or someone were buried beneath. From the gallery, Liam stood. He hadn't meant to. The movement was subconscious, a tug from some invisible thread that seemed to pull him upright. He stared at Argo. And Argo, without turning his head, flicked one ear back in his direction. There was something strange about the moment, something dissonant. Argo didn't look like he'd lost control. He looked like he had remembered something. Clara reached for Liam's sleeve, whispering, "Sit down, baby. It's okay." But her voice was distant. Liam's eyes were locked, not on the scene as a whole, but on the set of shoulders. The tail held straight, the barely quivering back paw that kept hovering, hesitating, then scratching again, just like Tanner used to when he smelled something odd beneath the porch. And then, with a small shudder, Argo stopped. He turned his head slightly, catching Liam's stare again. Their eyes met. Liam's breath caught. There was no bark, no motion, just a long, still gaze. Not of a police dog, not of an animal in attack mode, of someone looking back. The bailiff rushed forward. "We're going to need to clear the courtroom for a recess," he announced, projecting over the rising murmurs. "Is this some sort of intimidation tactic?" One of the Atlas attorneys snapped, gesturing toward Clara's bench. "This is absurd." But the judge had already pushed back his chair. 30-minute recess, he announced firmly. "Court will resume after we address the situation." People filed out in a ripple of confusion and low voices. The jury was ushered into a side room, looking shaken. Clara stayed frozen in place for a moment, hand still on Liam's arm. "Mom," Liam whispered, not quite sure why his voice trembled. That wasn't just a reaction. He knew where to go. Clara turned slowly, studying her son's pale face. "Sweetheart, it's probably just a scent. Dogs are trained for all kinds of things. But not like that," Liam said, his voice firmer now. "That wasn't random." They were alone in the gallery now, except for Officer Rayburn, who knelt beside Argo. The dog was quiet again, sitting back on his haunches, but his eyes never left the scratched panel. And as Liam watched, the officer pulled the dog's collar aside to check for abrasions. Just for a second, just the briefest flash, the edge of an old engraving caught the light. "TAN." Liam's breath hitched. He blinked, leaned forward, squinted, but Rayburn's hand had already slipped the collar back into place. He sat back, stunned. Argo glanced at him once more. A flicker of something passed between them. Not quite confirmation, not quite denial, but something real. The air had turned heavy. Even after Argo had been muzzled and led out of the courtroom by two tense handlers, a silence remained, not the dignified hush of a court in session, but the kind of pause that tightens around the lungs like cold wire. Somewhere, between disbelief and dawning realization, people stopped looking at each other and began scanning the walls, the floor, their own belongings. Clara stood frozen near the plaintiff's table, lips parted but saying nothing. Her file folder stuffed with handwritten notes, folded affidavits, and printed satellite images of the deforested ridge was gripped tightly to her chest. But she didn't seem aware of it. Liam stood behind her, eyes wide, fists trembling just enough to make the sleeves of his hoodie flutter like leaves in a draft. Two court officers crouched low near the jury box, speaking quickly into radios. A third unlatched the oak panel that Argo had clawed at. When the panel creaked open, the officer blinked, went still, and said into his shoulder mic, "Confirm visual. Repeat wiring confirmed. Get the bomb squad now." At the sound of the words, "Bomb squad," someone gasped aloud. Judge Hayworth stood abruptly, banging her gavel once, then again, but the sound had lost its authority. "Clear the courtroom," she ordered, voice quaking. "Now! Everybody out!" Panic doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it's 100 people trying to move calmly through a door that was only meant for two. Shoes scraped, chairs toppled, someone dropped a phone and didn't bother picking it up. Clara turned to Liam, pulled him close by the wrist. "Stay with me. Don't run." "I'm not," Liam murmured. But his eyes weren't on the door, or his mother. They were locked on the wooden panel, still open beneath the jury box. From a safe distance, one of the tech officers crouched and peered in with a small flashlight. A strange, sulfuric smell drifted faintly into the room-burnt plastic, motor oil, something synthetic and wrong. The kind of smell that doesn't belong in a courthouse. Then came the second confirmation. "We have wires, unknown circuitry, possible pressure plate." Moments later, the room was cleared. Officers and legal aides gathered on the courthouse lawn under a chalky gray sky. Reporters were already circling like crows sensing carrion. Cameras clicked, microphones extended, but Clara couldn't hear any of it. Her gaze remained fixed on the courthouse doors, as if they still held something. No, someone just behind them. A hush fell over the crowd as the bomb squad arrived. Dark blue suits, visored helmets, and the slow, methodical movements of men who know what it means to be careful. One of them wheeled in a robot sleek and low, camera-eyed, with claws instead of hands. It moved like a beetle with purpose, slipping through the doors and into the courtroom like it had done it 100 times before. Liam leaned into his mother's side. "Was it Tanner?" he whispered. Clara looked down at him, the question hitting her like a soft blow to the ribs. Argo, sweetheart. His name is Argo now. But was it him who found it? His voice dropped to almost nothing. Would he have let us sit through it? Clara swallowed. Number he wouldn't. Across the lawn, Greaves the lead attorney for Atlas stood with a handkerchief pressed to his forehead. His face, usually slick with smug composure, was pale, jaw tight, collar suddenly too tight for his neck. His tie was askew, and for once, his eyes didn't wander toward the press. They were fixed on the building, darting back and forth as if expecting it to breathe or explode. Inside, the bomb squad confirmed the worst. Pressure, activated device under jury box. Wired to external trigger, remote, capable, primitive but effective. Jesus, someone muttered. This wasn't just a message. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. If Argo hadn't broken protocol, if he hadn't sensed something, reacted, refused to be leashed by obedience, they would be retrieving bodies, not evidence. It wasn't just instinct. It wasn't just training. It was memory, buried beneath metal and reconditioning, that had stirred. Outside, a cordon was drawn. Reporters were held back. A judge was escorted to a black SUV and driven away. Clara gave her statement to the police in quiet, concise bursts, her voice low but even. Her palms shook only once, and Liam, without being asked, reached up and took her hand. The world moved on, as if it had only stumbled, not nearly collapsed. But somewhere, in a white van parked just beyond the police perimeter, a handler named Ruiz stared at the silent K9 sitting inside his crate. Argo was calm now, too calm. Not panting, not pacing, just watching. His eyes were steady, not the frantic eyes of a dog who had just averted a tragedy. There was something old in them, something weary. And for the first time, Ruiz noticed the faint scratches beneath the collar-barely legible letters, softened by time, hard to see unless the light hit just right. T-A-N, Ruiz blinked. What the hell? But Argo didn't move. His ears twitched once, then settled. Outside the van, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees across the courthouse lawn. Liam looked up, then back toward the vehicle that held the dog. He didn't say a word, but the message was there, carried quietly in the pause between heartbeats. Something isn't over. The courtroom remained sealed behind thick oak doors, its energy fractured and electric in the aftermath of the bomb squad's intrusion. Clara stood stiff in the hallway, her arms wrapped around herself, as if she could still feel the tremor of Argo's snarl echoing through the floorboards. Officers murmured over comms, reporters circled like vultures, but none of it registered. What she noticed, what she couldn't look away from, was the way Liam stared at the German shepherd across the corridor. Argo, or the dog that had been called Argo, stood between two uniforms, tethered by a standard-issue lead, panting lightly. His tail had lowered. His ears flicked every now and then as the voices of strangers rebounded off stone walls. But his gaze was still pinned to the boy in front of him. Not the judge, not the handler, not the crowd. Liam. And Liam, as if gravity had shifted around, only him took one hesitant step forward. "Stay back," one officer warned, hand half raised. But Clara shook her head. "Wait," she said softly. "Let him." She saw it then. The thing she hadn't let herself believe, something older than memory, etched deeper than language. That kind of connection doesn't just disappear. Liam reached beneath his shirt and pulled the thin silver chain that had always rested around his neck. From it hung a whistle. Dull now, slightly tarnished. Clara hadn't seen it since the fire. She'd assumed it was just one of the many relics he clung to, a token from a world they'd lost. She never imagined it would matter. Liam raised it to his lips. The hallway hushed. 3 short, sharp whistles. The world didn't stop, it just faded. No sound except the fading echo of metal and breath. Then, Argo froze. The dog's ears stood at full attention, head tilted. Then from deep within his chest came a short bark. Then another. And one more. 3. Clara gasped. The leash slipped from the stunned officer's hand. Argo walked forward, slowly, deliberately, the way a soldier approaches familiar ground after too long at war. He stopped just in front of Liam, nose twitching. His eyes were no longer alert and hard. They had softened, as if time peeled back. Then, as if summoned by some buried instinct, Argo sat. Perfect posture, tail tucked, ears high, waiting. Clara felt her knees threaten to buckle. She covered her mouth. The tears came without her knowing, rising through the cracks she'd held sealed for so long. She could still remember Tanner, not just the dog, but the way her son had been when they had him. That was before the fire, before the court dates, before Liam stopped speaking in anything but whispers. Now, standing there, Clara saw something loosen in Liam's shoulders. He lowered the whistle and looked into the dog's eyes. "Tanner?" he whispered. The shepherd's ears twitched, and then, gently, as if he'd never left, Tanner leaned in and pressed his forehead to the boy's chest. It wasn't a trick, wasn't training. It was recognition. Clara's hand slid against the wall as she steadied herself. People were watching now. Phones recorded. Lawyers gawked. But no one dared interrupt. Liam wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, his fingers tangling into fur that was older, thicker but familiar. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. The bond said it all. 2 years ago, Tanner had vanished. No records, no microchip, no body, just smoke and loss and a hole in Liam's world no therapist could fill. And now, against reason, against bureaucracy, against all that should have buried a dog's identity beneath layers of code and protocol, he was here. Tears streaked down Clara's cheeks. Her chest ached with something too old to name something between grief and joy. The same ache she'd felt the night the shelter called to tell her there were no survivors. The same ache she felt watching her son try to smile for her, day after day, and never quite making it past the corners of his mouth. But today in this hallway, that ache cracked, because her son was smiling, and the dog who made him whole was alive. A uniformed officer approached slowly. "Ma'am," he said low, "we're going to need to debrief the boy. There are protocols." Clara held up a trembling hand. "Give them a minute," she said, voice thin but firm. "Please, just a minute." He hesitated, then nodded. Across the hallway, Greaves, the corporate lawyer from Atlas, stood like a stone statue, watching the moment with a tightening jaw. His phone remained in his palm, screen dark. He didn't blink, didn't move, because in his gut, he understood something too. This wasn't just a dog. This was evidence, and witness, and memory. And somewhere beneath all the iron and lies Atlas had built, something was beginning to shake. Back by the courtroom doors, Argo no, Tanner finally stood, one paw still resting against Liam's shoe. Liam looked up. He didn't say, "Good boy." He didn't give a command. He just whispered again, "I knew you'd come back." And for the first time in a long time, the boy didn't sound broken. The scent of scorched circuits still lingered faintly in the courthouse air, an invisible trace of what could have been. Though the building had been cleared and declared safe, a quiet unease rippled beneath every breath. Outside, the sky hung low, gray and expectant. In courtroom 2B, silence reclaimed the space. The flag stood unmoved. The judge's bench was still empty, yet 3 figures remained. The handler, Officer Reese, the boy, Liam, and the dog who now sat between them, poised but alert. "You're making a mistake," Reese said, voice taut, arms crossed over his vest. "This isn't your dog. I've worked with K9S for 9 years. What you saw back there, that wasn't loyalty. It was stress, instinct maybe, but not memory." Liam stepped closer. His hand rested gently near the dog's shoulder but didn't touch. He answered the whistle. Exactly 3 barks. The same pattern I trained him on when I was 7. Before the fire. Before he went missing. The dog's ears twitched. "You could have trained any shepherd that way," Reese argued. "These dogs are taught hundreds of commands. He's a good K9, but he's mine now. And I'm telling you, he doesn't recognize you." Liam swallowed. His eyes were glassy, but his voice didn't shake. "Then let him choose," Reese scoffed. "This isn't a custody battle." "And no," Clara interjected from the gallery, stepping forward, her voice steady but edged. "But it is a matter of truth." She held up a folded photograph worn at the edges, creased through the middle. It was of Tanner as a puppy, half draped across Liam's lap, tongue out, eyes bright. In the background, their old house stood intact, not yet touched by smoke and ruin. "Do you see that scar above his paw?" Clara pointed to the dog Argonau, watching quietly, eyes flicking from face to face. He got it from the day Liam tried to skateboard with him tied to the back. He tripped. The board spun. Tanner bit pavement. I never let them forget it. Reese looked. He said nothing. He also sleeps curled to the left, Clara added, softer now. He flinched when a man in a Navy uniform passed us in the hall. And when Liam calls him Tanner, he doesn't run away. He listens. Not like it's a command, but like it's a name. Still, Reese's jaw was tight. I'm responsible for him now. And yesterday, he disobeyed me. He left his post. That's a demerit. Some would say disqualification. Others would say it saved our lives. His voice faltered near the end. The truth was hard to swallow, even for him. Clara stepped closer, voice quiet enough to disarm. Maybe it's both. Across the room, Judge Navarro entered flanked by security, face drawn with gravity. Everyone stood. The gavel came down not with fury, but with fatigue. I've been briefed, she said, eyes sweeping the room. There will be no further trial proceedings until the investigation regarding the planted device is complete. That's non-negotiable. A murmur rose, then fell. She turned her gaze to Clara. However, I understand that you've requested a formal identity verification for the K-9 involved. Clara nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I believe the dog named Argo is my son's lost companion, Tanner. We are requesting a DNA match. And Navarro looked at Reese. Objection. Reese hesitated, then exhaled. No, Your Honor. I won't stand in the way of the test, but I reserve the right to remain with the dog until results are returned. Noted, the judge replied. She paused, glancing at Liam, whose posture had shifted subtly, not in defiance, but in hope. Testing will be expedited. Until then, the court is adjourned. The gavel fell again. The echo rang longer than necessary. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, thinner, maybe, or just closer to truth. Clara knelt in the corridor beside Argo. The dog pressed his snout gently into her hand. You look older, she murmured to him. So do I. Liam crouched beside them. The silver whistle clutched in his palm. If it's not him, he said, barely above a breath, I'll let him go. But Argo shifted, not away, toward, and rested his chin on the boy's knee, as if the answer was already known, just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. A few steps back, Reese watched, his fingers flexed at his side. In his eyes, not anger, but something quieter. Doubt. For the first time in weeks, the truth wasn't a weapon. It was a bridge. And somewhere between the past and present, the air began to shift. The air inside the precinct was strangely still, as if even the fluorescent lights above dared not hum too loudly. Argo stood between them silent, watchful, his ears slightly tilted back, not in aggression, but in wary expectation. His coat, darker around the shoulders, bore faint traces of scars hidden beneath the fur. He was alert, but not tense. Still, the room was holding its breath. Clara reached out first. Her fingers, normally firm from years of trial work, trembled slightly as she touched the standard-issue black collar around his neck. It felt worn, rougher than it should be for a dog with an official handler. Her eyes traced the grooves of dirt embedded near the buckle, as if the collar had lived 100 different lives in silence. Liam sat nearby, elbows on knees, eyes locked on the dog. His voice had been quiet all day, almost unused, but now it came out in a rasp. Try underneath, he said. Clara's brow furrowed, but she nodded and gently unclipped the metal tag that read K-9 Unit, Federal Asset, 371A. It clinked softly onto the metal desk, sterile and cold. Beneath that, her fingertips found another layer, older, flatter, obscured by years of dirt and wear. It took a moment. With one thumb, she wiped the metal clean, slowly revealing a dull brass plate beneath the government tag. The engraving was barely legible at first, but the curve of each letter emerged like a ghost breaking through fog. Tanner, property of Liam Holt. No one spoke. The room, once a place for barking radios and ringing phones, now seemed to exist outside time. Even the clock on the wall ticked slower. The K-9 handler, Officer Metzger, shifted from foot to foot. A man who had worked with dozens of working dogs, who believed in protocol like gospel, found himself unmoored. His voice cracked when he finally broke the silence. I didn't know that was there. Argo, or Tanner, as it now seemed, sat down gently on the tiled floor, his eyes focused only on Liam. There was something in that look steady and old, deeper than commands or conditioning. Not a dog watching his handler, a soul remembering his person. Liam let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He pressed his fingers against his lips, then to his brow, trying to contain the flood rising inside. "It's him," he whispered. "God, it's really him." Clara leaned back against the edge of the desk, collar still in hand, the brass tag cool in her palm. Her throat tightened. She remembered the photographs. The boy with the mess of curls, arms wrapped around a floppy-eared puppy. She remembered the nights after Tanner vanished, Liam screaming in his sleep, clutching his chest as if something had been torn from inside. "Do you remember," Clara said slowly, "what you told me the night he disappeared?" Liam blinked, the memory hitting like a soft ache. "I said I didn't lose a dog," he murmured. "I lost my shadow." Across the room, Metzger crouched down. "This can't be coincidence." But the microchip says Argo was donated by a civilian kennel in New Mexico, part of the federal selection program. Clara straightened. That means someone re-registered him, stripped his identity, and repurposed him as a government asset. Metzger nodded slowly, but his face was pale. "That's illegal unless sanctioned through channels. Even then, dogs with previous owners aren't eligible for military programs." Her grip on the collar tightened. "Then we need to find out who did it, and why." Tanner's ears twitched, and he took one step forward toward Liam, stopping only when he was sure he had permission. Liam didn't wait. He knelt, arms open but tentative, eyes searching the dogs for a flicker of recognition beyond instinct. Tanner didn't leap or bark. He just leaned his head into Liam's chest, slow, deliberate, and let out the faintest sound. A sigh. Not from exhaustion, but relief, as if some weight had lifted. Liam's fingers curled into the thick fur at the scruff of his neck, and his shoulders shook with quiet sobs, the kind that don't come from pain, but from something older. Reconciliation. The return of a piece of yourself you thought was lost forever. Metzger stepped back. He no longer looked like a man with something to prove. Instead, he looked like someone standing at the edge of something he didn't understand and no longer needed to. "I'll file the request," he said softly. "DNA confirmation. It'll take a few days, but I won't dispute what's in front of me." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice almost hoarse. Tanner's eyes fluttered shut for a moment under Liam's touch. The kind of shut that says, "I am safe here." "I taught him to wait for 3 whistles," Liam said, voice steadier now. "Every time I left for school, he'd sit by the porch. When I got home, I'd blow it. 3 short whistles. And..." He reached into his coat, pulling out the silver whistle again, the one he'd kept like a relic. Clara watched silently, her eyes rimmed red. "You think you're preparing a child for the world?" she whispered. "But nothing ever prepares them for a loss like that." No one spoke again for a while. The only sound was the soft hum of the precinct vent and the rhythmic, steady breath of the dog who had come back from the dead, not with fanfare or drama, but by sitting still, offering his head, and waiting to be remembered. Beneath the fluorescent lights, with the brass plate gleaming dully in Clara's hand, the truth sat quietly between them. Sometimes memory doesn't need words. Sometimes a name engraved long ago is enough to bring someone home. The clock on the wall ticked softly, a low, rhythmic metronome in the hush of the midnight hour. Outside the precinct's guest quarters, the wind sighed through the trees, brushing against the windows like someone hesitant to knock. Inside, the room was dim and still. A single lamp cast a golden pool of light beside Liam's cot, but the boy had long since turned to face the wall, curled in that quiet way children do when the day has demanded too much. Sleep never came easily anymore. Even on the rare nights when exhaustion pulled his body toward rest, his mind floated elsewhere to memories that stitched themselves into dreams then frayed apart again. He hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone since the explosion scare, not even to Clara. Some part of him still doubted everything, still feared this was some cruel game fate was playing with him. Then came the sound, not loud, just a soft, persistent scratching. 3 slow drags of paw against wood. A pause, then one more. Liam sat upright, heartbeat drumming in his chest. He didn't call out, didn't ask who or what it was. He simply rose and padded barefoot across the floor, the air cool against his arms. As he reached for the doorknob, a hush seemed to fall over everything, as if the world were holding its breath. He opened the door, and there he was. Not Argo. Not the uniformed, obedient K9 who had guarded a courtroom that morning. This was Tanner. He wasn't sitting tall in a command posture. He was lying curled up just beside the hallway baseboard, his head resting gently over his paws. His ears perked as he saw the boy. But he didn't move, didn't lunge or whine or bark. He simply lifted his gaze, those same eyes Liam remembered from 100 ordinary mornings and stormy nights, and blinked, slow and calm. Liam stepped aside, wordless, and Tanner padded past him. The German shepherd walked with an ache in his stride, a stiffness that age or hardship had carved into his limbs, but every step was deliberate. He crossed the room without hesitation and curled beside the fireplace, though the flames were only embers now, barely breathing orange. It was the exact same spot Tanner had claimed in their old home. He didn't sniff around or inspect. He simply settled, as though he'd never left. The boy stood frozen. Then he followed. No words. Just the soft shuffle of his feet across the rug, and the faint creak of old floorboards. He knelt beside the dog. Tanner shifted just slightly, lifting his head and meeting the boy's eyes again. There was a glimmer there, not recognition, but something older, deeper, a knowing, a memory that hadn't died. Liam reached out slowly, his fingers trembling. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in, rested his forehead against the boy's knee, warm and solid and real. Tears welled in Liam's eyes, uninvited but unresisted. They weren't the kind that came in sobs or gasps, just the quiet sort, born from something that had waited too long for release. He pressed his fingers into the coarse fur along Tanner's neck. It still smelled faintly of cedar and dust, and something comfortingly familiar. Then came the lick, a single, slow swipe across the boy's knuckles. Gentle, purposeful, like a signature written in silence. Liam's breath hitched, and in a voice that barely pushed past his lips, he whispered the words he hadn't said in 2 years, not since the night the world changed. "Welcome home." The dog lifted his gaze again, ears twitching, and for the briefest second, something passed between them, not just affection, not even memory. It was belonging, like two pieces of a story that had wandered far and finally found each other again. From the hallway, a faint creak, Clara watching, silent as a shadow. She didn't enter, just stood there, one hand over her chest, her other resting against the doorframe. In her eyes, not surprise, not even sorrow, just awe, and maybe something close to prayer. Behind Liam, Tanner stretched slightly, his body relaxing into the carpet, breath evening out. The fire popped once, scattering a faint blush of sparks. Liam didn't look up. He stayed there, hand still resting on the shepherd's back, his fingers tracing an old scar, the one Tanner had gotten, jumping the neighbor's fence, chasing crows. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faintly and faded. But in that room, in that moment, there was only stillness, the quiet kind, the healing kind, the kind that said, "You made it back." Not just the dog, the boy, too. He had spoken, he had let himself feel. And the one who once kept him safe through lightning storms and lonely birthdays and nights when his father's voice had sounded like thunder was here again. No leash, no badge, no uniform, just Tanner, just Liam, just the fire, flickering soft shadows on the wall like forgotten lullabies. The morning after the courthouse evacuation, the air in the city felt strangely thick, not with smoke or sirens, but with narrative. By 8 a.m., Atlas Global Biotech had issued a press statement, not through a quiet press release or a buried article, but in a bold, live-streamed appearance on 3 major networks, spearheaded by their media liaison, Cameron Voss, a man whose veneers shone brighter than the truth he tried to polish. He stood at a podium bearing the sleek, sterile logo of Atlas, a minimalist white helix wrapped around a globe. His voice was smooth, practiced, and utterly devoid of the tremor that had been in Clara's when she had spoken the day before. Let me be clear. What occurred in the courtroom yesterday was a tragedy narrowly averted, and Atlas Global Biotech is cooperating fully with investigators. However, and this is important, there are those who benefit from public chaos, from discrediting scientific advancement, from undermining trust in institutions. We believe this was the work of eco-extremists. The camera panned wide. Behind him stood two suited men with blank expressions, legal muscle and tailored armor. And just behind them, as if accidentally framed, was Greaves. Still pale, eyes sunken from the courtroom debacle, a bead of sweat clinging to his temple like it had taken residence there. Cameron continued, each word measured like a dose of painkiller. Enough to numb, not enough to cure. We do not take lightly the gravity of what was discovered. But let me remind you, it was our own canine unit that detected the threat. Without Argo, a loyal service animal trained under federal protocols' lives might have been lost. That is not the mark of a guilty institution. That is the mark of vigilance. It was a masterstroke, and Clara knew it. Watching from her small office 2 blocks away, she felt the bile rise in her throat. They had taken her discovery, her terror, and twisted it into a badge. Her phone buzzed. Again and again. Messages from reporters, board members, even her sister. You sure you're not just trying to bring them down for the payout? Clara, tell me this isn't about your son's dog. I thought you left all that behind. Is this really worth dragging into public? She didn't answer. Instead, she stared at the paused image on her screen, Voss with his hand over his heart like a patriot, selling comfort. Look at them, she muttered. They're already rewriting it. Across the city, in a brightly lit news studio, a popular anchor leaned forward with a half smile. The headline scrolling beneath him read, Atlas Hero Dog Foils Courthouse Attack. Eco-terrorism suspected. Whistleblower. Tied to family tragedy. The co-host, a woman with sympathetic eyes and perfect posture, leaned in. We've heard reports that the whistleblower, Dr. Clara Holt, is the mother of the boy who was separated from the dog in question. Doesn't that raise questions about her objectivity? The words hit harder than slander. They were not outright lies, they were framed truths made to bruise. Back at the courthouse, Atlas attorneys filed a motion to resume proceedings. No mention of the bomb, no reference to the security footage showing a maintenance panel deliberately removed a week prior. Just a flat insistence. The incident was unrelated to our operations. In public, Atlas portrayed calm, but in private, the emails flew fast. Internal memo. Confidencial. From C. Voss. Subject. Narrative alignment. Ensure all external communication recognition behavior refers to it as a training reflex. Avoid terms like alert, panic, or unusual behavior. Highlight partnership with law enforcement. Begin seeding talking points to press. Asterisk. Targeted because we're growing too fast. Asterisk. Punished for innovating. Asterisk. When you change the world pushes back. Clara sat alone at her desk, fingers trembling slightly over her keyboard. She'd been up all night compiling the footage from the collar discovery, the panel Argo had clawed at, and the whistle scene with Liam. But truth was slower than spin. Her uploads were met with takedown notices within hours, copyright violation, privacy breach, manipulated content. Even truth, it seemed, needed permission to breathe. She opened the window. The air outside was cooler now, the smell of autumn creeping in through the cracked pane. On the sidewalk below, 2 journalists argued over parking spots while a third aimed her lens at the precinct's entrance. This wasn't about science anymore. It was about story. And Atlas, damn them, was good at storytelling. Behind her, soft footsteps padded across the wood floor. Liam entered, hoodie zipped up to his chin, eyes sunken but alert. At his side, Tanner no longer, Argo moved quietly, ears pricked but relaxed, gaze steady as it rested on her. Liam spoke, his voice low, but with something new beneath it. Not just anger, resolve. Mom, he said, they're lying, but we're not alone. She turned. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone, opened a group chat labeled Whistleback. Dozens of names, photos, screenshots of old records, former handlers, discharged K9S, vet techs, whistleblowers, survivors. They're tired of being silenced, he said. They're ready. Tanner wagged his tail, once quiet, measured, as if he understood. Clara looked down at the blinking cursor on her email draft to the Department of Justice. Subject: Affidavit. Unauthorized biotech testing on federal K-9 units. She didn't hesitate anymore. She hit send. Outside, the headlines changed, but she had learned one thing from her son's dog. Sometimes, it only takes one bark to break a silence. And this time, they weren't going to stop. The courthouse lobby felt colder that morning, as if the marble beneath Clara's feet had absorbed the tension lingering in the air. Reporters hovered outside like crows, microphones in hand, hungry for sound bites and scandal. Clara adjusted her scarf, not to fight the chill but to steady her nerves. She spotted him immediately. Seated alone near the vending machines was a man in a tan windbreaker, eyes sunken and fingers trembling as he clutched a paper cup of coffee. His name was Felix Monroe, a former systems analyst for Atlas Industrial, the man who'd agreed at great risk to testify. He looked up when she approached, eyes darting past her shoulders, scanning for threats that hadn't yet shown themselves. "You, Clara Vale?" His voice was a whisper, dry and frayed. "I am," she replied, offering a calm, measured smile. "Thank you for coming." He didn't smile back. "You don't know what they are," he murmured. "You think this is about trees, about land, but they don't care about the forest or the people in it. You're not going to win this, Miss Vale. Not by the rules." She crouched down beside him. "Then tell me what I'm up against." Felix reached into his bag and pulled out a yellowed folder. Inside were internal memos, maps, site schematics, and a list of payments. Some went to offshore accounts. Others bore initials Clara recognized: Greaves, Thornton, even 2 names in local law enforcement. Bribes, payoffs, silence. "I tried to report this last year," he said, eyes watering. "They buried it. A man in a black SUV tailed me for weeks. My sister got an anonymous tip to convince me to stop asking questions. That same week, her brakes failed. She survived, but..." His voice broke. Clara placed a hand on his gently. "We can protect you. The judge will place you under witness shield. We'll request closed testimony. We can." But the words trailed off as Felix's gaze fixed on something or someone behind her. His eyes went wide. A man in a maintenance uniform stood across the hall, holding a clipboard, just watching, too still, too composed. And when Clara turned fully, the man gave a slight nod to Felix, not threatening, not overt. But it was enough. Felix stood abruptly, folder clutched to his chest. "I'm sorry, I can't." Wet Felix. But he was already walking away, fast, toward the rear exit. Clara followed, calling his name, but security stepped in. "Ma'am, please. This area's restricted." She stood frozen in the corridor, watching through the glass as Felix disappeared into a waiting van. The license plate was fake. She knew it without needing to check. The folder, the evidence, was gone. That evening, Clara sat in her kitchen, lights off, fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea she hadn't touched. Outside, the rain traced long, aching lines down the window. Argo lay quietly at her feet, chin resting on his paws, ears occasionally twitching to the creaks of the old house. She hadn't told Liam what had happened. How could she? How do you explain to a child that truth can be bought and witnesses can vanish into fog? The silence was broken by the soft chime of her phone. A message. Unknown number. "You're out of your depth, Miss Vale. Go back to planting flowers." She stared at the words, heart heavy but no longer surprised. The gloves were off. This wasn't about trees anymore. It was about something darker. A machinery that chewed through decency and left nothing but scorched earth behind. Atlas wasn't just a company. It was a fortress with lawyers instead of guards, money instead of missiles. And she, Clara Vale, had walked straight into the heart of it with nothing but hope and an old case file. But across the room, Argo lifted his head. As if sensing something shift in her, she knelt beside him, buried her face in his thick fur, and for a moment allowed herself to feel it all. The despair, the weariness, the ache of trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. And then she exhaled. Long, slow, determined. She whispered, "They can erase files, they can scare witnesses, but they can't silence what he wore beneath his collar." They can't rewrite the way Tanner looked at my son. Argo nuzzled her cheek, a low hum vibrating in his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. It was a vow. And Clara understood. She wasn't alone in this. The next morning, a reporter from the Woodhaven Sentinel called. "Miss Vale, off the record, did you know that the former Atlas engineer who was supposed to testify disappeared last night?" Clara didn't reply. "Not immediately." The reporter hesitated. "Sources say a gag order is being considered for your case. That Atlas is moving to suppress all court footage due to ongoing federal interest." There it was. The spin. The noose. "Thank you for the warning," she said, "but I'm not backing down." She hung up and turned to the mirror. She saw the creases forming at the edges of her eyes, the grief that hadn't faded, the fire that hadn't died. Argo stood behind her, his reflection calm, steady like a sentinel. "You were taken," she whispered to him. "Reprogrammed, renamed, but you remembered. Somehow, you came back." She touched his head gently, then stepped toward the door. "I owe it to you, to Liam, to every name Atlas tried to erase." Outside, the morning light was gray and cold, but she walked into it with purpose, because the truth was no longer a file in a folder. It lived, it breathed. It had 4 legs and a brass tag no one could explain away. And no one, no matter how powerful, could make it disappear again. The courthouse parking lot was drenched in an uneasy hush. The kind that didn't belong to a weekday morning, too quiet for downtown, too still for a place supposedly secure. The rising sun barely cleared the rooftops, casting long shadows across the pavement, slicing between parked sedans and black government SUVs like cold blades. Tanner's posture shifted before anyone noticed the man. It started with a twitch of the ear, subtle, barely perceptible unless you were watching closely. Then his stance stiffened, his weight shifted back, then forward. A low rumble coiled in his chest, steady and controlled. Clara felt it first, vibrating beneath the leash. "Tanner?" she whispered, kneeling slightly, her fingers brushing his fur. But Tanner's eyes weren't on her. They were locked on a dark van idling 3 rows down, where a man in a gray jacket had just stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses too dark for the morning light. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't loitering. He was waiting. The growl sharpened. One short bark, then another, then a third. Liam turned. "That's the same bark from before." From the hallway, Clara followed Tanner's line of sight, her gut folding in on itself. "Stay with him," she said, pressing the leash into Liam's hand. She jogged toward Officer Wren, who was drinking from a paper cup by the rear of the building. "You need to run a check on that man near the black Sprinter. Don't make it obvious." Tanner's flagged him. Wren stiffened. No questions. No hesitation. His radio crackled. Within seconds, 3 officers moved in casual unison, peeling off from the building's entrance and drifting toward the van with the quiet choreography of suspicion. Clara walked slowly back, heart thudding. Tanner hadn't moved. His body was taut as wire, nose lifted slightly, tail rigid, not aggressive, just focused, trained. The man saw them. For a split second, he faltered, the kind of pause that betrays knowledge. Then he turned, reached for the van's door. "Hey," Wren called. "Step away from the vehicle, sir." Clipboard clattered to the ground. The man bolted. What happened next unfolded with startling clarity. Officers converged. The man didn't make it past the second row of cars. He was tackled, cuffed, and pressed to the pavement while a K-9 unit backed by bomb squad personnel moved in on the van. Clara pulled Liam close, away from the scene. Tanner remained seated, but his eyes tracked every motion. "Who is he?" Liam asked. "Driver," she said, her voice distant. "Evan Greaves' driver. I've seen him twice this week. Always lingering. Never said a word." The bomb squad was methodical. Windows were broken carefully, doors unlatched. What they pulled out didn't look like much at first. 2 sealed cases, a tablet, and a small duffel with wires poking through the zipper. But when they opened the duffel, the air changed. It wasn't a bomb. It was materials, for one. Unregistered detonators, timer circuits, plastic compounds in black film canisters, a remote trigger disguised as a garage door opener, tucked into the side pocket, a laminated sheet with names, photos, courtroom seating diagrams, one name circled in red, Clara Holt. "Ma'am," Wren said quietly, I need you and your son to step inside. Now." Liam clutched her coat. His voice was paper thin. "They were going to hurt you." Clara didn't speak. Couldn't. Inside the courthouse, she stared at the white ceiling, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. The shock hadn't reached her body yet. She could still feel Tanner's fur beneath her fingertips, still hear the cadence of his warning barks, the same signal he gave when he found a buried gas line behind their cabin 2 years ago. The same signal he gave when he discovered Liam's missing inhaler beneath the porch. This wasn't random. It wasn't training alone. This was Tanner, her Tanner. Wren returned with a printout. "The van's unregistered. Plates are fake. Driver won't talk. But we ran his prints. Name's Marshall Deeks. 3 prior charges. All sealed. But he's worked for Greaves' private security firm for 6 years. Looks like they've been laundering field ops through dummy companies." He paused, then added, "You're not dealing with a corporation anymore, Clara. You're dealing with a system built to erase anyone who stands in the way." She nodded once, eyes dry but unblinking. "Then we won't blink." In the corner, Tanner lay curled at Liam's feet, chin resting gently across the boy's shoes. His tail thumped once, then again, not fast, just present. "You knew," Liam whispered. "Didn't you?" Tanner looked up. No bark, no whine. Just that look, that deep amber-brown gaze that held memory like a well holds water. Liam reached down, slowly, and touched the bridge of his nose. "I'm not scared," he said softly. "Not if you're here." Clara stood, her voice calm now, her spine straight. "We have proof, a motive, a witness, even if he won't speak. It's not just about Tanner anymore. This is war, and they came to the wrong battlefield." Outside, sirens flatted. Inside, in the quiet hum of the interview room, a mother, her son, and a dog who remembered everything, even the weight of a vanished name, sat still and unshaken. For the first time since the courthouse explosion, Clara felt something settle inside her. Not peace, purpose, and it had teeth. The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound for several seconds after the gavel tapped to recess. The private deposition chamber, tucked 2 levels below the main courthouse, had no windows, just aging brick walls that carried the smell of damp concrete and mildew. A sealed room deliberately chosen for discretion. Liam stood slowly, rubbing the stiffness from his knees. His notebook remained untouched on the table. Across from him, Clara was still reviewing the last page of cross-examination notes. Jaw clenched, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. The air was heavy, like the pressure before a storm. Tanner lay curled at Liam's feet, chin resting over his front paws. His chest rose and fell in that slow, even rhythm that only German shepherds seemed to master alert, but still, always still. The court clerk collected papers with practiced quiet, her heels clicking against the tile as she stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her. That's when the silence changed. It started with the flick of an ear. Then Tanner stood. No growl, no bark. Just a full-bodied stillness, the kind that rippled through the spine of anyone paying attention. Clara noticed it first. She stopped mid-sentence. "What is it?" she asked. Tanner's head tilted, ears locked toward the direction of the hallway. A second passed. Then 2. Then he moved, deliberate and low to the ground, slipping around Liam's legs like a shadow. His tail dropped, his shoulders stiffened. He was tracking something unseen. "Wait," Liam whispered, already following. "Tanner!" Clara called out, but her voice had no command over him. He was answering something deeper now, something that spoke in scent and instinct. Tanner reached the door and scratched, once soft, calculated. Liam opened it just enough for them to slip into the hallway beyond. The corridor was empty, lit by a dim yellow line of ceiling bulbs. Everything looked ordinary. Except Tanner wasn't looking. He was listening. Then he moved fast and sure, guiding Liam past the stairwell, down the hall, toward the basement maintenance corridor. He didn't bark. He didn't hesitate. Only once did he glance back. And in that glance was a message Liam didn't need translated. "Follow me." Now, they reached a rusted steel door that led to a side entrance rarely used. It had been propped slightly ajar. Just enough. And just to the left of it, tucked behind a mop cart, was a black backpack. Liam stopped breathing. Tanner didn't sniff it. He sat down beside it. Still, motionless, head high, ears up. That was all Liam needed. He grabbed the nearest emergency pull alarm and yanked. A shrill siren burst through the courthouse's silence. Clara, who had just started to gather her things upstairs, froze when the sound reached her. She didn't ask questions. She ran. Within minutes, the basement was flooded with protocol bomb squad officers in thick armor, fire marshals, barking instructions, and courthouse security ceiling exits. The dog didn't move the entire time. Tanner remained exactly where he was, eyes fixed on the pack. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. Clara found Liam standing behind the yellow caution tape, arms crossed tight against his chest. The last few minutes had stripped the color from his face. "You saw it first?" she asked, breath-catching. "I didn't." Liam's voice cracked. "He did." The officer in charge, a square-shouldered woman with graying hair and eyes like granite, emerged 10 minutes later with a steel case in hand. "We need confirmation," she said, opening the case to reveal alive detonator wires and all. Secondary device. Would have taken out half this floor. Timer was set to detonate at 5 p.m. sharp. Liam looked down at his watch. 4:53. Tanner finally stood, his posture relaxing. He walked back to Liam and sat beside him again. No tail wag. No victory bark. Just the same calm as before. Like it was routine. "He's not just reacting," Clara murmured. "He's remembering." The bomb squad chief knelt beside Tanner and read the tag under his collar, already tarnished by age. Her brows lifted. "This is the dog from the courtroom, isn't it?" she asked. Clara nodded. "He's more than he seems." The chief gave a low whistle. "Well, whatever his past is, you better hold on to him. We just avoided a massacre." Tanner leaned his body into Liam's legs just enough to be felt, not enough to be noticed by others. Liam knelt down, pressed his forehead gently to Tanner's, and breathed in the familiar scent of him old pine needles, worn leather, something warm and unexplainable. "You remember," he whispered. "You really remember." The noise around them faded for a moment. It was just the two of them again. Boy and dog, firelight memory and present danger converging in the same heartbeat. Then Clara stepped closer, her voice low. "Liam, this wasn't random. This was planted during a closed session. Whoever's behind this, they knew our location. They knew the timing." He stood, still keeping one hand on Tanner's back. "They're escalating." Clara didn't argue. She simply said, "And they're not afraid of being caught." Silence settled again. But it wasn't the empty kind. It was loaded now with unspoken truths, with the weight of what was coming. Down the hall, an officer radioed in a request. "We need a list of everyone who accessed the basement in the last 48 hours. Tanner sat beside Liam, still watchful, still waiting, because somewhere in the building, the enemy was still inside, and he would know them when he smelled them. The glow of the laptop screen lit up Clara's tired face in the dim room, casting flickers of blue against the shadows lining the walls. The air felt still like the pause between heartbeats. Liam sat beside her, his arms folded tightly across his chest, Tanner resting his chin on the boy's bare foot, unmoving. The three of them had barely spoken since the second bomb threat, the near miss that left everyone shaken but more determined. On the table, Clara's camera equipment had been rigged hastily, wires tangled like nerves. A USB drive lay next to the keyboard, the whistle footage and grainy security cam clips compressed into one package. In the videos, Tanner moved like a ghost with purpose, sniffing, stopping, then barking low and sharp near the backpack. His instincts had saved lives again, quietly, without ceremony. "I don't know if it's enough," Liam whispered, eyes glued to the thumbnail preview looping on the screen. "They'll say it's doctored." Clara's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "They can say what they want, but this is the only thing we have that they can't silence." She clicked upload. The title blinked back at them from the screen. "The Silver Whistle, What They Tried to Erase." Then she sat back, shoulders trembling slightly, as if the act itself had pulled something heavy out of her. She reached down to scratch behind Tanner's ear. He didn't move, but his eyes flicked upward, catching hers with that steady, knowing gaze, the kind that felt older than time, older than grief. They waited. At first, silence. Then a notification pinged. Then 10. Then a flood. The comments poured in mostly quiet at first. Small names floating up from the sea of usernames. Is that? Wait, that looks like Rex. Fort Landry K9 unit? I served with a dog just like him. His name was Tanner. Lost him 2 years ago. This whistle sound. It's how we called in. Our injured K9S. This is military training. And then came a post, an old photograph, grainy and faded. A young soldier with haunted eyes knelt beside a German shepherd, his arm around the dog's chest. Brass tag gleaming on the collar. Tanner, property of Liam Holt. Clara's breath caught. She clicked on the username, Holt Family Journal. The profile was a scrapbook of loss. Old K9 training shots, missing dog posters from 2 winters ago, and entries titled, Still Waiting, and He Saved Me in Ways No One Ever Saw. Clara's hand moved to cover Liam's. He stared at the photo, lips trembling. That's the day before he disappeared. And then it happened. The video had been live for only 40 minutes when it was picked up by a K9 rescue Facebook group, Guardians Left Behind. From there, the story exploded. Veterans began flooding in, posting their own stories, tagging handlers they served with. A retired sergeant uploaded a video. That dog in the footage? That's Tanner. He used to run drills at Camp Ashby. He had this thing, he'd nudge his handler's elbow every time he sensed someone lying. It was like magic. Another posted, he went missing. Atlas said he was reassigned, but we never got closure. Others began to put the pieces together. Comments came in like puzzle pieces being slammed into place. That brass plate was military issue. It's illegal to replace it without cause. Why would Atlas reassign a combat dog with that level of bonding? Unless they were covering something up. Clara leaned back as the numbers skyrocketed. Hundreds of thousands of views. A tidal wave of shares. Then hashtags began to trend. Number, where is Tanner? Number, bring him home. Number, whistleblower dog. But what broke her most, what cracked something raw and unguarded inside her, was a message that came in from a girl named Olivia, posted under a blurry video from a shelter. He stayed at our rescue for a night after the fire. He refused to eat. Just stared out the window like he was waiting for someone. We called him Shadow. If I'd known who he was. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Tanner, unaware of his sudden rise to viral symbol, stood and moved to Liam. He pressed his snout into the boy's ribs and let out a soft, low whine, a sound of release more than request. Liam dropped to his knees. You waited for me, didn't you? He whispered, resting his forehead against Tanner's. Outside, the wind picked up. Cold swept in under the door. But the room was warm, and the fire crackled in the grate like an old memory flickering to life. That night, a reporter called, then another. By midnight, Clara's inbox was overflowing. News anchors wanted interviews. One investigative journalist from the Herald Tribune said only this: We've suspected something about Atlas's K9 reassignment program for years, but no one had proof. Until now. Clara didn't sleep. Instead, she watched Tanner, this dog that had been passed off, renamed, stripped of his identity, like a number on a file, now sleeping peacefully beside Liam, as if nothing else in the world mattered but the boy he once knew. And somewhere in the quiet hum of data and digital breath, the truth began to move like wildfire. They couldn't erase what was living. Not anymore. The man didn't look like someone with secrets. He arrived at the precinct just before sundown, shoulders hunched, wearing a gray ball cap too clean for his age. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if some part of the building might bite him. Clara met him in the interview room. Lights dimmed. She didn't offer her hand, didn't need to. The man already looked like he was shaking from ghosts. Name, Paul Darby. Former handler, K9 Tactical Division. Retired early. Oh. He sat across from Clara, but his eyes kept drifting to the mirror on the wall. Not because he feared being watched, but because something in his own reflection unsettled him. You said you worked with a dog named Argo, Clara began. Paul gave a dry laugh. That's what they called him. He reached into his coat, pulled out a wrinkled folder. He set it on the table like it weighed more than paper should. Clara flipped it open. Inside, deployment records, behavioral assessments, even shipping logs. But none of it was under the name Argo. The tag said Tanner, property of Liam Holt. I was there the day they brought him in. Paul said quietly. It was supposed to be a rescue dog got loose during a flood response. Handler presumed dead. He still had the plate on him, but they said to cut it off. Said we needed clean inventory. Clara looked up sharply. Inventory? Paul nodded slowly. That's what we became. Dogs. Handlers. Every last one of us. He pointed to a line on the deployment roster. They marked Tanner as unclaimed. Said no one came forward. That was a lie. I saw the emails. The boy Liam submitted reports. Please. No one responded. They blackholed it. The air in the room stilled. Clara turned to a photo on the file's last page. It was a training exercise, a field, somewhere in Arizona. Dust, sweat, and in the center of it all, Tanner leaping through smoke like a creature forged in fire. His eyes were alert. But something else lingered in them. Resignation. We thought we were helping, Paul said, giving these dogs a second life. But most of them, they weren't ready. They weren't even asked. They were repurposed, reassigned, like hardware. He fell silent, twisting the rim of his cap in his hands. I remember Tanner because he wouldn't bark during shock drills, wouldn't bite unless he had to. The others said he was defective. He looked up, eyes red. But he wasn't. He was just waiting for something. Someone. The room went quiet again, save for the soft buzz of the light overhead. Clara leaned forward. Why now? Paul's fingers trembled as he pulled out a small key. He slid it across the table. This opens Locker 9 at the Old South compound. They never cleared it out after we shut down operations. Inside, you'll find the rest. Records. Handler assessments. Video files. He hesitated, then added, and one more thing. A whistle. Clara frowned. A training whistle? He shook his head. Number, the real one. The one Tanner was bonded to. They made us switch signals, but sometimes, when it was quiet, he'd respond to something I couldn't hear. As if some part of him still remembered. Outside the room, the light through the window dimmed to a soft amber. Shift change. Clara stood, motioned toward the hallway. Paul didn't move. I'm sorry, he said softly. For what? For thinking dogs could forget. That night, Clara drove alone to the southern edge of the city where the old training center sat behind rusted fences and overgrown grass. Tanner lay in the back seat, head resting quietly on the cushion. He didn't stir when they passed the old gate. But the moment they stepped into the hallway, his ears twitched. She unlocked Locker 9. Inside, a dented metal case, a faded binder, and a red cloth pouch. She opened it gently. The whistle was small, tarnished silver, the kind used in field ops long ago. As she held it up, Tanner stood. Not suddenly, not out of duty, but out of memory. His eyes locked on hers, and something behind them shifted. Clara lifted the whistle, but didn't blow. Instead, she knelt and whispered, "Come." Tanner stepped forward, quiet, assured, as if the boy he'd once sworn to protect had just called from inside her voice. The clinic was quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday morning. A faint hum from the fluorescent lights trembled above the sterile tile floor, but even that felt distant, like the world was holding its breath. Clara stood by the metal exam table, arms crossed, her jaw set but trembling slightly. Beside her, Liam gripped Tanner's leash like it was the last thread tying him to something true. Tanner sat still, his posture calm, but his ears twitched at every sound, the door hinges, the printer in the corner, the breath Clara didn't mean to hold. I don't know what we'll find, Dr. Morales said gently, crouching beside Tanner with the scanner in hand. But I promise I'll be honest with you. If it's there, it'll show. The chip. That silent, invisible truth buried beneath a layer of skin and fur. Clara had found the paperwork last week, a line item on a K9 reallocation log, flagged only by a technician's half-hearted question mark. R09 reassigned. No consent form on file. Nothing else. Just a name, a code, a silence that felt deliberate. Tanner didn't flinch as Dr. Morales brought the scanner close to the base of his neck. The machine beeped once. A number flashed across the small screen, a string of digits, cold and clinical, a pause. That's the active ID, Morales said, voice low. It matches the K9 unit log, reassigned to Atlas Tactical 18 months ago. That's what the court saw. That's what the contract shows. But Clara pressed, her voice as thin as the air in the room. Morales turned the scanner over in her hands. "But this model can pick up archived chip signals, too. Sometimes when a chip's been rewritten, the original data leaves an echo like a ghost in the system." She adjusted a setting, fingers quick and steady. Then, once more, she passed the device over Tanner's neck. This time, it didn't beep immediately. It blinked. Once. Twice. Then it chirped a soft, stubborn sound. Another number appeared. Clara stepped forward. "Is that?" Morales didn't answer right away. She moved to her computer, typing fast. The screen filled with a registry window, a familiar layout, public but not easy to navigate. She entered the second number, and there it was. Registered name, Argo. Owner, Liam Holt. Date of registration, the 14th of November, 2021. Status, lost pending archive. Liam stared at the screen. "That's him. That's us." Clara felt her throat tighten. It wasn't just a number. It was memory-coated in silicon and scar tissue. It was the boy on a winter porch and the dog who never forgot. It was proof real, legal, undeniable that Atlas had lied. Morales leaned back in her chair. This chip was overwritten, illegally. It shouldn't even be possible without consent from the registered owner. But someone forced the change through, probably using internal credentials. That's a felony under the Federal Animal Identification Act. Clara closed her eyes. The magnitude of it sat heavy in her chest. This wasn't just about one dog. This was systemic. If Tanner's chip had been rewritten, how many others had? How many families were told their dogs had run off, been lost in training, been unfit for service? How many children slept with a leash under their bed, waiting for a return that would never come? "I need this report," she said quietly. "Every page, every timestamp. We'll submit it to the court chain of custody, forensic trace, everything." Morales nodded, already printing. "I'll also testify, if it comes to that. I've seen a lot in 20 years, Clara. But this?" She shook her head. "This feels different. This feels wrong in its bones." Liam hadn't moved. He kept his hand on Tanner's neck, his small fingers threading through the fur with a kind of reverence. Clara turned to him gently. "Liam?" He looked up, eyes glassy but calm. They took his name. Her breath hitched. He was Argo. That was ours. And they erased it. No one corrected him. No one tried to soften the truth. Tanner leaned his head against Liam's chest then, as if affirming it all: the name, the bond, the memory of a backyard that once smelled like pine and soap bubbles. And for the first time, there was a path forward. Later that day, Clara would file an emergency petition with the district court. The microchip report would be Exhibit 1, the archival match, Exhibit 2, a veterinary affidavit, Exhibit 3, and a photograph grainy but clear of a boy and his dog under the wide blue of Montana sky. The press would run it. The public would latch on. But here, in the quiet clinic room, before the headlines and the noise, there was just this: a truth that finally had a name, and a boy who never stopped waiting. The courtroom had become less a place of law and more a theater of tremors. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, the sound lost beneath the layered murmurs of a public fraying at its edges. After weeks of misdirection, disappearing witnesses, and blurred truths, Clara sat still. She didn't blink. Liam, beside her, hands knotted into fists. And beneath the table, Tanner's body pressed lightly against Liam's leg, his silent way of anchoring them both. Across the aisle, Evan Greaves sat, suit freshly pressed, tie too tight, neck glistening. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but the words seemed to bounce off a mind preoccupied with its own collapse. The man who once walked marble floors like he owned the ground beneath them now looked like he was waiting for a trap door to open. The prosecution stood. "Mr. Greaves," the DA said plainly, "we have verified accounts, footage, whistleblower testimony, and the microchip evidence linking K9 Tanner to unlawful reassignment. You authorized those transfers, didn't you?" Silence. Greaves stared forward, not at the DA, not at Clara or Liam, but past them, as if trying to fix his gaze on a version of himself that hadn't yet begun to rot. The judge leaned in. "Mr. Greaves, you are under oath. You will answer." A breath, then another, And then, the quietest quake. Yes, the word dropped like a pin on stone. Not dramatic, not performative, just hollow, tired. Greaves' lawyer's head snapped toward him. Panic. Evan. I said yes, Greaves repeated. Louder this time, throat catching around the vowels. I authorized the reassignments. I signed off on the relocation of canines deemed unclaimed from civilian shelters to Project Response. Without the knowledge or consent of prior owners, the DA pressed. Greaves' voice lowered. That was the directive. No contact, no notification. Paperwork was altered to show abandonment. We were told they'd be retrained, repurposed, given a second chance. And the bomb? The courtroom seemed to shudder at the word. A long pause. Greaves inhaled sharply, then exhaled like it hurt. That wasn't the plan. The original plan was intimidation, a scare tactic, just noise. But something changed. One of the contractors, he escalated it. You mean the explosive device planted during the trial of Clara Lorne? Greaves nodded, every inch of the motion like dragging a burden off his neck. I didn't know it would be real until after. After it almost. He couldn't finish. Liam stood abruptly. Almost killed Tanner. His voice was calm, but beneath it was thunder. Almost killed my dog. The judge pounded her gavel. Mr. Holt, you are not permitted to. But she stopped mid-sentence. Because Tanner, as if on cue, rose. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stepped forward, ears tilted forward, eyes locked on Greaves. That single movement said what needed saying. The room hushed. Greaves looked at the dog like he'd seen a ghost. He wasn't supposed to survive, he said, not to anyone in particular. No one was. His lawyer buried his face in his hands. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with camera shutters and voices rising into the dusk. Protesters clutched posters, justice for Tanner, they're not property, dogs remember too. Reporters read scripts while holding their earpieces in place, trying to keep pace with the unraveling. But inside the courtroom, time seemed to fold. Clara turned toward Liam, her voice barely above a breath. He cracked. No, Liam replied, eyes still on Greaves. He confessed. The DA looked to the judge. Your Honor, based on this testimony and the prior evidence submitted to this court, we move for immediate protective injunctions against all active personnel involved in Project Response. Furthermore, we request federal review into Atlas Corporation's partnerships with the Department of Tactical Operations. The judge nodded slowly, her face unreadable. Motion noted. Mr. Greaves will remain in custody until formal charges are filed. A bailiff stepped toward him. Greaves didn't resist. He stood, shoulders caving inward, as if the act of telling the truth had broken something vital. And in the moment before he was escorted out, he looked at Clara, really looked at her. You were never wrong, he said. Just louder than we expected. Clara didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some truths don't need amplification. They just need daylight. As the doors closed behind Greaves, Liam knelt and pulled Tanner close. The dog leaned into him, chest against chest, like a soldier returning to his post. Outside, the crowd began to chant, but in that courtroom for just a minute it was quiet. And in the quiet, healing began. The courtroom was silent, not the kind born of tension, but the quiet that followed a storm. Dusty light from the tall windows caught in the floating particles above the judge's bench. The oak-paneled walls seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if they too had been holding something in. Every pew was filled, reporters, families, veterans, forestry workers, and a few children clutching handmade signs. Thank you, Tanner. And there he was. Tanner sat at Clara's feet, ears forward, posture erect. His fur shimmered faintly in the sunlight, worn in places, healed in others. A service vest lay beside him, removed at his own insistence, it seemed. Today, he wasn't a tool or property. He was what he always had been, a soul, a witness, a survivor. Judge Spencer adjusted his robe and cleared his throat. His voice, once brisk and matter-of-fact, carried a weight now seasoned by what the past weeks had revealed. Before I render this final ruling, I'd like to acknowledge an unusual participant in this case. There was a ripple of murmurs. Tanner. The dog's ears twitched. He looked up, steady. Some say justice is blind. I've learned it also listens. It watches. And sometimes... The judge paused, removing his glasses, wiping them slowly with the edge of his robe. Sometimes justice wears fur. Laughter broke out, not the kind born of humor, but of catharsis, of something lodged in the chest finally rising, becoming warmth. He continued, "This court finds that the microchip registered to Liam Holt confirms ownership and invalidates the military enlistment authorization granted to the Atlas Corporation. Tanner, previously known as K9 Unit Bravo 19, was unlawfully reassigned under falsified documentation." Liam's hand was tight in Clara's planks. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His body leaned into Tanner's flank. The German shepherd nudged his shoulder gently, like he'd done 1,000 times in silence. The judge turned pages, but there was no rustle. Everyone leaned forward, hanging on the hinge of justice. Furthermore, the plaintiff's presentation of whistleblower testimony, corroborating video surveillance, and forensic analysis of tampered microchips establishes a pattern of systemic abuse within the Atlas K9 reclamation program. Gasps, nods, silent tears. Judge Spencer looked at Clara, now really looked at her, past the fatigue and the dark circles, into the kind of resolve only those who stand between the innocent and the machine ever carry. "Miss Reyes, I commend your bravery and your patience." His gaze moved to Tanner again. "Your co-counsel as well." There were a few chuckles through the tears. Even Liam smiled faintly. The judge placed the papers down with finality. "Effective immediately, all Atlas logging operations in Ravens Hollow and adjacent national lands are hereby suspended pending a full federal inquiry. Injunctions will be issued to halt further deforestation activities. Any attempt to retaliate against witnesses, human or canine, will result in prosecution to the fullest extent of the law." The room didn't erupt in cheers. Not yet. It was as if the truth still had to settle, like dew on morning leaves. Then the gavel fell, and everything changed. A beat, then applause, erupting from the back and rolling forward. Camera flashes. A woman sobbing into her husband's shoulder. A veteran in uniform saluting the dog. One of the forestry workers removed his cap and pressed it to his chest. Clara knelt down beside Tanner, her forehead resting against his. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought the forest back to life." Tanner simply breathed, slow, measured, at peace. Liam stood beside them, one hand in Clara's, the other resting on Tanner's back, steady and sure, like placing a hand on a tree that had withstood the wind and not broken. As they stepped outside, the courthouse steps were blanketed with people. Children held up drawings of dogs. A blind veteran stood silently with his guide dog, offering a nod. An older woman, perhaps in her 80s, approached and gently touched Tanner's fur with trembling fingers. "He reminds me of Samson," she murmured. "My late husband's dog. Saved him in the war." Clara didn't correct her. In that moment, Tanner belonged to everyone. Reporters swarmed, questions flew. But Clara raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. "We didn't win just for trees," she said. "We won for all the voices that were taken, all the animals erased, and every soul that got labeled replaceable because someone with power said so." Tanner barked once sharp, proud. It echoed like a bell down the courthouse square. That night, under the stars, they returned to Ravens Hollow. The wind stirred through the trees like an old song. Liam stood with his hand against the bark of the same redwood they had once sheltered beneath. Clara watched as Tanner circled the base, nose low to the moss, tail wagging slow and steady. There were no sirens now, no bombs, no lies, just wind, bark, breath, and belonging. The ceremony wasn't public. No news vans, no headlines, just a stretch of late morning sunlight spilling across the courthouse lawn, a folding table draped in a navy cloth, and a handful of chairs facing east. The flag above fluttered with a quiet dignity, half-mast for a reason no one here would mention aloud, not today. Clara adjusted Liam's collar as he sat rigid in his chair, hands folded over a polished wooden box. Inside it, Tanner's old K9 tag rested beside a newly engraved one. Beside them, Tanner lay still at Liam's feet, ears perked, eyes scanning with the calm of a dog who understood what mattered now was no longer command, but presence. Officer Delgado stood near the podium, his crisp uniform offset by the worn leash wrapped around one hand, not as handler, but friend. His voice was low when he began. "This is not a retirement," he said. "This is a reunion long overdue." No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence carried more weight. Delgado stepped aside, nodding toward the boy. Clara gave Liam's shoulder a gentle nudge. He stood, swallowed, and walked up holding the box. He didn't speak at first, just opened the lid, let the sun hit the silver tag inside the new one. He reached down and unclipped the one Tanner had worn since the program. Liam's fingers trembled, not from nerves, but something older, something he hadn't quite had words for until now. Grief, perhaps, finally easing its grip. He placed the new tag around Tanner's neck. Tanner, home for good. The moment hung in the air. Tanner sat up straighter, tail brushing once against Liam's calf. There were no commands, no fanfare. Just that quiet acknowledgement between species, between hearts that had spent too long speaking only in memory. Judge Spencer stepped forward, glasses folded in one hand, voice rough with age, and something else, reverence. "I've presided over cases that changed laws," he said, eyes flicking from Liam to Clara to Tanner. "But very few that changed hearts." He unfolded a single page and held it out. "This document officially releases Tanner, formerly Argo 14, from active service with the state. It recognizes his previous bond with Liam Holt as legally restored, and it expunges any classification that ever labeled him property of the state." Clara took it, hands firm. Liam looked up at her, and she nodded like she always did, not as lawyer, not as guardian, but as someone who believed. The crowd began to move. Officers approached one by one, not with salutes, but kneels, each letting Tanner smell their hands, some offering quiet thank yous. One of them, a younger rookie with freckles and an unsure stance, reached down and whispered, "You're the reason I joined." Tanner rested his head briefly against the man's thigh. In the background, someone played a soft acoustic guitar, no lyrics, just chords that filled the spaces words couldn't. A woman from the animal shelter brought out a handmade quilt stitched with paw prints and unit badges. She placed it near Tanner's side, and for the first time in weeks, he lay down fully, exhaling. Clara watched all of it from a step back, her eyes glassy. She hadn't cried in court, hadn't faltered during Greaves' confession, but this was different. "This is what winning looks like," she whispered to herself. Liam tugged at her sleeve, his hand now resting on Tanner's shoulder. "Do you think he knows it's over?" Clara looked at the old shepherd, his muzzle tinged gray, but eyes alert, not tired, just full. She nodded. "He's always known," she said. "He just waited for us to catch up." From across the lawn, someone brought out a camera. Delgado motioned for Liam and Clara to kneel beside Tanner. The three of them framed against the courthouse pillars, with the flag still waving behind not a victory photo, but a portrait of restoration. One click, no flash, just light and truth. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara lingered behind. Liam and Tanner were now walking the perimeter of the grass. Liam tossing a soft tennis ball Tanner never chased, just gently nosed and returned, as if play was still something he was learning how to do again. Delgado approached Clara, both of them watching from a distance that felt earned. "You staying in town?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "For now. Tanner's going to need some time. So is Liam." Delgado nodded. "If you ever want to train again—" "I don't," she cut in gently. "Not that way. But I'll teach others. Teach them to see what Tanner taught us." Delgado folded his arms, eyes on the boy and dog now curled beside one another under a tree. A breeze carried the smell of summer grass and worn leather. "I never believed dogs remembered the way we do," he said. "But that one, he chose to remember." Clara didn't respond. She didn't have to, because in that moment, Liam lay back in the grass. Tanner, sensing the stillness, shifted until his head rested over the boy's heart the same way he had the night he found him, as if he had memorized that rhythm years ago, and now finally could sleep without having to protect it. Justice wears fur. The judge had said it days earlier, and now the words returned, softer, truer. But so does forgiveness, and so does home. The school auditorium wasn't large, but to Liam, it felt like a canyon. Rows of folding chairs stretched before him like silent waves. Somewhere in the third row, Clara offered a quiet smile, her hand resting gently atop Tanner's broad back. The dog sat still, only his ears twitching at the hum of overhead lights, alert but calm like always. The microphone squealed faintly. Liam flinched. His palm instinctively found the side of his jeans, fingers digging into the denim. He'd practiced the words, again and again. But now, standing beneath the soft spotlight, his throat tightened. The audience, classmates, teachers, a few strangers from town, waited in the kind of hush that could crush a boy's courage. Then Tanner huffed. It was barely audible, a low, breathy sound, more felt than heard. But Liam's eyes found him immediately steady, patient, a presence that anchored him through storms louder than this one. He took a breath, then another, and began. I used to think forests were just trees. His voice was small, but clear, heads tilted forward, listening. But I was wrong. They're alive, like families are alive. They remember things, if you stop long enough to hear them. He paused, some murmurs, a click of a phone camera. He swallowed hard. When the fire happened, he said, I thought everything good was gone. He didn't have to explain which fire. Everyone in Granite Hollow remembered. Smoke that carved the sky open, helicopters like insects circling, and a boy found hours later, half buried beneath ash and fear, his hands clutched around the scorched dog tag of a pup the world had tried to erase. I didn't talk for a long time, Liam continued. But I wasn't really silent. I was just waiting for someone who wouldn't leave when it got hard. His fingers tapped the edge of the podium. Once, twice. And then Tanner came back. The room shifted a soft gasp. The dog lifted his head slightly at the mention of his name, and a ripple of affection passed through the audience like wind across long grass. They said he wasn't mine anymore, that he belonged to the state, to some program, but he never stopped looking for me. Liam's voice was steadier now, not louder, just clearer, like a stream beginning to thaw. Some dogs, he said, don't need to be told what home means. They just know. Behind him, the stage curtain swayed faintly. Clara blinked faster than normal. Tanner didn't move. I talk now, Liam said simply, because people need to hear what happens when someone brave enough listens, really listens. He turned slightly, glancing at a science fair poster that had been taped to the wall behind the chairs. A hand-drawn tree in crayon, roots twisting down into soil labeled memory. We protect the forest, he said. Not just because it's beautiful. We protect it because it remembers who we are when we forget. Just like Tanner did. Applause started gently, one teacher, then two, and then the room bloomed with it. Not thunderous, but warm, human, a kind of sound that fills the space's grief, once carved open. Clara stood. Tanner moved with her. They approached the stage with the slow reverence of a homecoming, not a performance. Liam knelt as Tanner reached him, and without hesitation, the German shepherd pressed his head against the boy's chest. And in that moment, in that impossibly quiet collision of healing, no one breathed. Later, they sat beneath the edge of the schoolyard trees, the spring light tilting gold through the new leaves. Liam held Tanner's tag between his fingers, the new one, the one that read, Tanner, home for good. I didn't think I could ever say stuff like that, Liam admitted softly. Not without, panicking. Clara smiled, brushing a leaf from his hair. You didn't speak because you were broken, Liam. You were just waiting to feel safe again. And sometimes, she added, glancing at Tanner, safety has 4 paws and a terrible snore. Ugh. Tanner grunted, rolling onto his side in dramatic agreement. They laughed the kind of laughter that meant something you didn't realize was still cracked. That evening, the local paper ran a piece titled, Boy Once Silenced by Tragedy Becomes Voice for the Voiceless. A still image accompanied it. Liam, mid-sentence, one hand resting on Tanner's head, eyes alight with something almost forgotten. Not all stories end with justice in courtrooms or medals on collars. Some end or begin with a boy rediscovering his voice, not because someone told him to speak, but because someone, finally, listened. The porch creaked gently beneath Clara's bare feet as she eased herself into the old rocking chair. It was one of those summer nights that came quietly, no announcement, no thunderstorm curtain call, just a soft dimming of the sky, the hush of crickets starting their whispery chorus. Somewhere between twilight and stillness, it arrived. That rare, weightless moment when the world forgets how to worry. Tanner lay stretched out at the foot of the steps, chin resting on his front paws, ears twitching slightly at each sound in the distance. He wasn't on alert, not tonight. His body held no tension, only rest. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd seen him like this, completely unburdened. As if the invisible armor he'd worn for years had finally been set down at the door. From inside the house, she could hear Liam's breathing steady, soft, the kind of sleep a child doesn't fake. His bedroom window was open just a crack, and the sound of his small, even breaths mingled with the breeze. For so long, his silence had lived in every corner of this home. Now, that silence was being replaced. Not by noise, but by presence, by healing. Clara pulled the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders and watched as a firefly floated lazily past her line of vision, blinking its tiny lantern in rhythm with the flickering porch light above her. It had been Liam who insisted they leave it on, just in case he ever forgets the way, he'd said one night, pointing to Tanner. But the dog hadn't forgotten. Not his home, not his boy, and not her. Even when the world tried to rename him, erase the life he'd once had, Tanner had remembered. Clara exhaled slowly. The air was thick with pine and earth and something deeper, something sacred. Peace, perhaps, but not the kind that came and went like a distant cousin stopping by on rare occasions. No, this one felt rooted, familiar, like it had been waiting for them to return to it. The old screen door creaked behind her, and for a moment she thought Liam had woken, but there was no movement, no voice, only the sound of the wind, nudging it open slightly before it settled again. Clara didn't move. She didn't need to. Tanner had already glanced back, gave a short sniff toward the doorway, then lowered his head again. All was well. She sipped from the chipped mug in her hands lukewarm tea now, steeped more for comfort than caffeine. The mug still bore a faded inscription. Be gentle. Everyone's fighting a battle you can't see. It had been her husband's, Liam's father. She hadn't thought about that inscription in months, maybe years. But now, in the soft spill of porch light and memory, the words curled around her like the blanket on her shoulders. Clara looked at Tanner again. His tail thumped once against the wood in that quiet, content way dogs have when they know they're home. Not just a house, but home, with people who see them, love them, fight for them. You kept him safe, she said aloud, the words barely above a whisper. And somehow you kept all of us safe. And Tanner didn't lift his head, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch just a little. She didn't need a response. Dogs don't deal in words. They deal in watchfulness, in loyalty, in returning even when the world tells them not to. The memory came gently. That night, she found them. Liam crouched in the woods, Tanner shielding him with his whole body, mud on his fur, blood crusting near his ribs, but still unmoving. He hadn't growled, hadn't run. He had waited. Clara blinked. A tear had slipped free without her knowing, and she let it fall. She wasn't ashamed of these kinds of tears anymore. The ones that came not from pain, but from recognizing how close pain had come and how they'd survived it anyway. She leaned back and let the rocker move beneath her. The rhythm was familiar, like her mother's lullaby once was. Fireflies hovered in the space just beyond the railing, their lights blinking like quiet heartbeats. The forest, once threatened by greed and silence, now stood firm behind her, safe for at least another season. Maybe longer, maybe forever. Inside, Liam stirred once, murmured something, then rolled back into sleep. It struck her how normal that sounded now. A boy turning in his bed, a dog sighing on the porch, a woman letting go. She reached into the side table drawer and pulled out the small tag she had found earlier that day. It had been buried in one of her husband's old boxes. A simple brass disc, scratched with time, but still legible. Tanner, come home. Clara smiled. It had been his original tag before the program, before the missions, before the silence. She thought of giving it back to Liam in the morning. Maybe hang it above his bed or on the wall next to the photos they'd finally started framing. But for now, she kept it in her palm, warm from her touch. It felt like something sacred, like the last piece of a puzzle that had waited too long to be whole. Tanner shifted, then stood up slowly. He walked to her side, nuzzled her elbow, and sat back down, pressing his body close to the leg of the chair. She reached down, ran her hand over his thick fur. "We're okay now," she said softly. "We're home." Above them, the porch light buzzed once, then steadied. Below it, two silhouettes on human. One canina sat quietly as the night folded in around them. And for the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a stranger passing through. It felt like it lived here. The air smelled of wet pine and fresh earth. Clara stepped out of her pickup truck, careful not to disturb the hush that lived in the forest. The woods weren't silent. They spoke in whispers of rustling leaves, distant birdsong, and the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. She hadn't been back here since the trial, since the maps were redrawn, and justice finally carved a line around this place. A new wooden sign stood near the bend where bulldozers once parked. Protected Natural Area, in honor of Tanner, K9 hero and guardian of Granite Hollow. Her throat caught, not with grief, but reverence. Pride. A quiet ache, knowing something good had risen from harm. "Mom, we brought extra gloves in case more kids show up," Liam called, stepping out of the car with a canvas bag over his shoulder. Tanner trotted beside him, muzzle gray now but gait steady. The old K9 badge was gone. Only the brass tag Liam made remained. Tanner, home for good. They walked past the sign, down the narrow trail the Atlas Company once tried to turn into a road. Moss had crept back. Saplings stood where stakes once scarred the earth. Nature healed on its own terms, like people. Up ahead, a dozen kids waited in the clearing. Clara had helped start this monthly program. Guardians of Hollow Creek to clean trails, log wildlife, and protect what couldn't speak for itself. Tanner had become their mascot. Amara, a young girl, asked, "Is it true he used to stop bad guys?" Liam nodded. "Yeah, but he also stopped me from giving up." The group grew quiet. Clara sat on a log, letting the moment breathe. Forests carried memory the way skin carried scars. Granite Hollow had almost been erased not by disaster, but by indifference. Now it stood tall, alive, a legacy. The kids scattered collecting trash, journaling wildlife sightings. Liam showed Amara how to clear brush from a trail marker. Tanner stayed close, leaning into Liam's hand, sighing with contentment. Clara wandered to the stump where Liam once hid during his worst days, when trauma had stolen his voice, and Tanner stayed by him for hours. Now moss circled the stump's edge, and someone had carved a tiny heart into its side. She touched it gently. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about remembering the quiet victories. Tanner nudged her hand. "You remember, don't you?" she whispered. He sat, steady as ever. Liam's voice echoed from down the trail. "Mom, we're packing up." Clara pulled out a piece of chalk and wrote on the stump. "Still standing, always." That night, the Granite Hollow Civic Center was full. The screen flickered to life, projecting the face of a German Shepherd Tannerhiss, amber eyes glowing under softened light. The film's title appeared, Tanner, the Dog Who Remembered. Clara sat 3 rows back, hands clasped. Liam sat beside her, notepad in his lap like an anchor. The room was packed rangers, veterans, schoolchildren, reporters, and townsfolk. Some had come to remember. Some had come to heal. The documentary began with Liam's voice, soft but steady. He wasn't just a dog. He was memory. He was proof that something was wrong, and he never forgot me. Black and white stills followed grainy security footage, redacted K9 records, courtroom scenes, Clara's legal battle, Greaves' confession, and the judge's closing words. Sometimes justice wears fur. Sniffles broke the silence. Then the screen cut to a grizzled veteran, Jackson Reed, retired K9 unit, 3rd Battalion. "They used us. Used them. Some got medals. Some got bullets. Some just disappeared." More voices followed handlers, sharing stories of dogs lost, reprogrammed, or erased. Photos of Milo, Duchess, Rook, Coda dogs no one had seen again. Pain rose like a tide. The final montage returned to Granite Hollow. Liam stood beside a new bronze plaque in the woods. In honor of Tanner, who remembered what they tried to erase. As the credits rolled, no one clapped. They simply stood. A silver-haired veteran in the back saluted the screen. One by one, others followed. Outside, cool air settled under the porch lights. Tanner stood beside Clara, nose tilted to the breeze. "He'd hate all this attention," Clara murmured. "He never wanted to be a hero," Liam replied. He just wanted to come home." A woman in a worn denim jacket approached. "You're Clara Holt?" She held out a faded photo of her brother in fatigues beside a dark-coated shepherd. "That's Kilo. They told us he died overseas. But after tonight, I think maybe he didn't come back because someone didn't want him to." Clara brushed her thumb over the photo. "Would you talk to a reporter?" "If it helps someone's dog come home," the woman said, "yes." In the weeks that followed, calls and emails poured in. Former handlers, advocacy groups, petitions, testimonies. A senator introduced the K-9 Service Transparency and Retirement Act. Tanner's name was written into the preamble. The local high school added a class, Animal Ethics and Responsibility, co-taught by Clara and Ranger Davis. Liam volunteered, his voice now steady. Whenever he spoke of Tanner, it wasn't just about a dog, it was about survival, about finding breath again. One golden afternoon, Liam returned to the woods. His shoulders, once curled inward, now carried quiet strength. Tanner padded beside him, slower now, but still watchful, amber eyes sharp despite the gray around his muzzle. They reached a clearing, the place where it all began. The forest had healed. Ferns curled like question marks. Birds darted through sunlight. In the center stood a single towering pine, scarred yet unbroken. "This is the one," Liam whispered. He knelt and carved a single letter into the bark. T. It didn't need to say more. Not Tanner's rescues, not the court battles, not the nights Tanner licked tears from a frightened boy's face. Just T. It was enough. Tanner sat close, tail brushing the ground. Liam placed a hand on his side. "Do you think trees remember?" Tanner looked at him. Words weren't needed. "I like to think they do," Liam said softly. "Maybe someday someone will see this and wonder who It was. And maybe they'll feel it." They sat together in silence. A dry pine needle landed on Tanner's snout. He sneezed, and Liam laughed, just because he could. Finally, Liam stood. "Come on, boy." Tanner stretched, joints creaking but steps sure. He followed Liam down the trail, not behind, but beside. The tree would remember for them. The sky was the kind of blue that made you forget storms ever existed. Morning light poured through the tall windows of Mrs. Delaney's fourth-grade classroom, warming the edges of hand-painted posters and construction paper birds taped to the ceiling. The kind of morning where the world felt gentler somehow, like it too had been given another chance. Liam stood by the door, one hand gripping Clara's fingers, the other loosely holding a folded paper. His sneakers scuffed slightly at the tile, not out of fear now, but habit. In front of them, a sea of eager young faces waited behind tiny desks. The buzz of whispers, filling the air. Mrs. Delaney gave an encouraging nod. "Everyone, please welcome Liam and his mom and their very special guest." Right on cue, Tanner trotted in, tail held high but gentle. The kind of presence that filled the room without demanding it. He paused at the threshold, nose lifting slightly as if cataloging the scent of crayons, pencil shavings, and juice boxes. Then, with a soft chuff, he padded inside. The room erupted. Children clapped, some stood. One little girl clutched her heart as if it might burst from joy. Tanner's ears twitched at the applause, but he didn't flinch. His gaze found Liam's and settled there, steady as ever. Liam stepped forward, his voice clear but quiet. "This is Tanner. He was my dad's partner when they both served in the forest unit. He got lost for a while, but he found his way home." One boy, near the back, raised his hand, barely waiting for permission. "How did he know where to go?" Liam smiled, the kind that grew slowly like something thawing, because he never forgot. The class hushed. A quiet kind of wonder hung in the air, delicate as fog on early pine. Clara watched from the edge of the room, arms folded loosely, her eyes never leaving Liam. It wasn't just his word sit, was the way he stood now. Shoulders not curled inward but anchored, his chin lifted not with arrogance but with meaning. He walked to the whiteboard and opened his folded paper. I wrote something. It's called What Tanner Taught Me. Tanner settled beside him, front paws crossed, like he knew this part belonged to Liam. Liam read, Tanner doesn't talk, but he listens better than most people. He remembers things no one tells him, like which trees shade the trail and where the river gets loud. He found me when I didn't even know I was lost. He makes the world feel safer just by being in it. And sometimes that's more than enough. Silence, then clapping soft at first, then full. Mrs. Delaney dabbed at her eyes. Liam, that was beautiful. A girl in the front row raised her hand. Is Tanner a hero? Liam looked down at the German shepherd beside him. Tanner looked back, the kind of look that held more truth than language could reach. He doesn't want to be, Liam said. He just wants to be part of things, like us. There was something in those words, a quiet acknowledgement that not all heroes arrive in capes or uniforms. Some come with fur grayed at the chin, eyes that have seen too much and still choose softness, and paws that carry stories across miles no one else could travel. After the reading, the children took turns approaching Tanner, one by one, offering gentle hands and whispered thanks. He met each child with calm grace, never pushing, just present. One boy placed a friendship bracelet over Tanner's collar. The dog didn't move, but his tail swept once across the floor. Clara knelt beside her son afterward, brushing his hair back. You okay? Liam nodded, but it wasn't rushed. It's weird. I used to think no one would ever understand. But they do, sort of. Clara touched his cheek. You helped them understand. From the hallway, the janitor's radio crackled faintly. Lunch trays clattered somewhere beyond the classroom walls. But inside this room, time had taken on a different rhythm, slower, kinder. Tanner rested his head on Liam's shoe, eyes half-lidded, breathing steady. He was home, not just in place, but in purpose. Before they left, Mrs. Delaney placed a laminated photo on the bulletin board, a snapshot of Liam, Tanner, and Clara under the Forest Protectors mural painted by the school's art club. Underneath, a hand-lettered caption read, Some heroes walk on 4 legs and remember their way home. As they stepped out into the golden hallway, firelight shadows dancing from the tall windows, Clara felt something ease inside her. Not closure, Reno, not that, but continuity. A line that had frayed and tangled, now rethreaded through community, voice, and love. She looked down as Liam took her hand. His fingers no longer clung but offered. Do you think, he asked softly, we could come back next week and talk about how to take care of the trails? Clara blinked. You want to lead that? Liam looked up, the corners of his mouth twitching toward a smile. I think Tanner and I could, if that's okay. Clara squeezed his hand. That's more than okay. That's perfect. Behind them, Tanner gave a single, low woof. Not loud, not urgent, just heard. The schoolyard had quieted. The last wave of children had filed back inside, some still whispering Tanner's name like it was part of a bedtime story come true. The old German shepherd had taken it all in stride, the pats, the giggles, the wide eyes that met his with the kind of wonder only children can give. Now, under a soft gray sky, Clara, Liam, and Tanner stood just beyond the school gate. Liam's fingers toyed with something small in his pocket. Clara watched him with the gentle patience of someone who had seen grief turn its edges smooth with time. You brought it? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Liam nodded. Yeah. Oh. He pulled it out slowly, a silver whistle, worn at the edges, the metal dulled from years of weather and memory. Tanner's ears perked up the moment he saw it, tail giving a lazy sweep across the grass. The whistle had first been used years ago, when Liam was still a little boy with shoulders too narrow for the burdens he'd carried. It was what Clara had given him the day Tanner was officially placed under his guardianship, a quiet symbol of trust between a child learning to speak again and a dog who never needed words to understand him. Liam brought it to his lips and blew not sharply, but gently, like calling across a memory rather than giving a command. The sound was clear, soft, and steady. It barely broke the air, like a breeze shaped into a note. Tanner lifted his head. For a moment, he stood still, one paw suspended mid-step, as if he were listening not just with his ears, but with something deeper. Then he turned his head toward Liam, eyes steady and warm, and trotted back a few steps. He paused, nose touching Liam's knee. Just for a second, a quiet acknowledgement. Then, without any cue, he turned again and trotted ahead on the path, tail swaying like a slow metronome. Clara exhaled. He still listens. Liam smiled faintly. He always has. And saying, they walked after him, the three of them in line like a memory that kept unfolding. The wind had picked up slightly, brushing through the tall grass and pine trees around the edge of the school. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just enough to move things, just enough to remind them that time kept going. As they crossed the field, Clara slowed her steps, letting Liam move ahead. There was a rhythm to their walk, unhurried, like the day itself didn't mind waiting. She watched them, the boy with shoulders now broader, no longer stooped by silence, and the dog with a silver muzzle but a steady gait. It felt like watching an echo take on new form, not fading, but deepening. The past hadn't disappeared. It had simply softened. Halfway to the car, Liam stopped. He turned, looking over his shoulder at the empty field, then back toward the school. "You okay?" Clara asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was distant, not lost, more like he was gathering something from the air. A moment, a sound, a feeling. Then he said quietly, "You remember that day, when I ran away and Tanner found me?" Clara nodded. "I remember. I was so sure no one ever would. But he came like it wasn't even a question, like I was already found before I got lost." Clara's voice caught in her throat. She blinked, then nodded again. "That's what love does. It tracks you through the dark." "Oh?" Liam looked down at the whistle still in his hand. "I didn't think I'd ever use it again." "You didn't need to," she said. "But sometimes the forest needs to hear it too." At that, the wind picked up again this time, threading through the nearby pines, making their boughs sway in that slow, whispering dance they do when no one's watching. It wasn't just a breeze now. It was like the forest breathing. Tanner stopped up ahead, ears turning toward the trees, his body still, except for the tip of his tail, which tapped the ground once, then twice. Liam lifted the whistle again, held it between his fingers, but didn't blow it this time. He just looked at it. The silver caught a streak of sun breaking through the clouds, just for a moment. Then he tucked it back into his pocket, gently, and walked to Tanner's side. The old dog looked up at him, and Liam placed a hand on his back, fingers threading through the thick fur. Neither moved for several seconds. When Liam finally stepped forward again, Tanner followed, not behind, not ahead, but beside. Clara watched them go, the boy and the dog, walking into the edge of the wind. There was something about that image she knew she'd hold on to for the rest of her life. Not because it was grand, but because it was real. Peace, she realized, didn't always come in stillness. Sometimes it came in motion, in the steady walk of someone who had come back from silence, and someone who had waited without asking for anything in return. The wind rustled again, threading through the pine needles like a quiet song, not loud enough to demand attention, just enough to remind them promises kept don't need to shout. They just walk beside you. And sometimes they have 4 paws. The camera lingers on the forest at dusk, not in grand sweeping shots, but close enough to hear the soft hush of pine needles falling, to catch the golden light flickering against old bark, to see paw prints fading in soil still damp from the morning's dew. The world doesn't roar here. It remembers. Somewhere, a silver whistle rests in a child's pocket, untouched, but warm. It doesn't need to be blown. A single bark once saved a life. It cut through snow and silence like a match struck in the dark. That bark didn't come from a creature seeking glory. It came from a dog who remembered, who chose not to forget. Tanner's story wasn't loud. He didn't seek cameras or medals. He didn't ask to be called a hero. But when it mattered most, he barked. And that was enough. A voice Clara's emerges, steady but soft, like something spoken to the trees more than to the world. We used to think heroes had to be seen, that they wore uniforms, stood on podiums, made speeches. But sometimes they just wait by the back door, or find their way through the dark, or carry a scent in their heart until it leads them home. Images flash gently across the screen. Liam hugging Tanner near the old pine. Children in a circle, brushing the dog's fur with tender fingers, like he's something holy. A plaque at the edge of the woods. In honor of Tanner, guardian, guide, friend, M. A veteran's hands shaking as he places a ribbon on a weathered photo of his own K9 partner, tears unapologetically marking his cheeks. Then, a final shot. A silhouette on the ridge, the outline of a boy and a dog against a sky that is quietly letting go of the day. The wind picks up slightly, tousling hair, fluttering pine branches, as if the world itself exhales. A title fades in, slow as breath. Real heroes don't always speak. Sometimes they bark at the right time. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. The screen lingers in silence. No swelling music, no closing narration, just the forest. Just the wind, just the echo of something remembered. If this story touched something quiet in you, you're not alone. Because anyone who's ever looked into the eyes of a German Shepherd knows they don't just see us, they know us. They carry our memories, walk beside our fears. And sometimes, they're the first to remind us we're still worth saving. This wasn't just a story about Tanner. It was about every dog who waits by the door. Everyone who never gave up on us, even when we couldn't speak, even when the world turned cold. If you've got a dog by your side, or even just a space in your heart, and you're wondering how to deepen that connection, there's something I found recently that might speak to you. It's not flashy, just thoughtful, something that reminded me what it feels like to really listen to our dogs. I'll leave a little link below, in case it calls to you too. And if not, that's okay. Just maybe tonight, give them an extra scratch behind the ear. Sometimes, that's all it takes. Thanks for being here. And thank you truly for loving dogs the way you do.